Knox spent his first night after escaping in a ditch by the road. He lay on the damp ground, pressing his right pocket against his stomach. 3 seeds in a damp rag, a handful of dirt in his left, an empty stomach. He walked all night along a country road heading south, away from the farm, away from the Iron Dominion. By morning, he reached a small town. The sign at the entrance was rusty and crooked. Greystone. The town looked like every town after the rift. Half the houses were empty, the shops were closed. On the streets, a few people with gray faces and lifeless eyes. Not a single hunter in sight. Greystone was too small for the rift and too far from the major dungeons. The guilds didn't come here. There was nothing of value here. Knox found an abandoned greenhouse on the outskirts. The glass walls were cracked but hadn't shattered. Inside, it smelled of damp earth and rotting leaves. Knox went inside. He sat down on the floor and fell asleep. He woke up to the sound of a click. A rusty rifle was pointed at his face. Behind the rifle stood a girl of about 21, thin, pale, with dark circles under her eyes. Purple spots were blooming on her wrists. Knox knew what it was. Mana toxicosis, an occupational disease of those who tried to use mana without sufficient rank. It was expensive to treat. Without treatment, it killed within a year or a year and a half. She coughed, a hollow, wet cough. She asked who he was and what he was doing in her greenhouse. Knox slowly raised his hands. He looked at her, at the purple spots, at the cough, at the slender fingers on the gun. And he said that if she had 3 days and the glass of warm water, he would make her a cure, for free, in exchange for a roof over her head. She laughed. The laughter turned into a cough. The cough lasted a minute. When she straightened up, her eyes were wet. She said that a cure for mana toxicosis costs as much as a car, that even B-rank healers charge as much for a course of treatment as she wouldn't earn in 5 years. Knox asked her not to laugh and to show him the garden. Her name was Hana Kim. She was 21 years old, a former pharmacology student. Her mother was a B-rank healer. She died in a dungeon in the 2nd year after the rift. Hana was left alone, with a greenhouse, with an E-rank herbalist class, which was considered almost as useless as an F-rank farmer. And with mana toxicity, which she had earned while trying to activate her class abilities without enough mana. The garden behind the greenhouse was overgrown, weeds up to her waist, unpruned bushes, overgrown and dead garden beds. But Knox wasn't looking at the garden beds. He was looking at the weeds. One bush caught his attention. Hemlock, a common weed that everyone pulls up and throws away. Poisonous, useless. But Knox crouched down in front of it. He activated soil identification and saw what he wanted to see. The root of this particular bush was entwined with mycelium. Not ordinary mycelium, that very same mutated mycelium he had studied in the fields of Iron Dominion. The mycelium was channeling mana from the soil into the hemlock root and altering its chemical composition. The alkaloids in the root were restructuring. The poison remained, but alongside the poison, a substance was appearing that Knox recognized by its structure. An antidote to mana toxicity, a byproduct. The plant was creating it by accident. But Knox knew how to turn an accident into a recipe. He dug up the root, brought it to the greenhouse. He asked Hannah to give him a jar. She gave him an old jam jar. Knox put the root in the jar. He filled it with warm water. He took one of the 3 seeds out of his right pocket, black, with a living surface. He dropped it into the jar. Hannah looked at him as if he were crazy. Knox explained, not everything, just what she could understand. The seed was a nitrogen fixer. It triggered a reaction in the mixture that accelerated the root's fermentation. Without the seed, the process would have taken months. With the seed, 3 days. Hannah asked where he got the seed. Knox replied that he'd stolen it from the Iron Dominion. Hannah stared at him for a long time. Then she lowered her gun. She said he could stay, 3 days, if the medicine worked. Knox nodded. He placed the jar on the windowsill where the warm morning sun shone, and he went out to the garden. While the medicine fermented, he worked. For 3 days, he lived in Hannah's greenhouse and did what he knew how to do. He weeded, he pruned, he loosened the soil, he checked the soil. The soil in Greystone was different from the fields of the Iron Dominion. It was poorer in mana, but cleaner, without that strange, deep vibration he'd felt in the north. Here, he could work in peace. On the second day, Hannah went out into the garden and saw that he'd already cleared 3 beds. She stood and watched. Then she asked why. Knox replied that the earth doesn't like being neglected. Hannah said nothing. On the third day, he took out a jar. The liquid inside had turned dark green with a golden sheen. The seed had dissolved completely. The hemlock root had turned into a soft pulp at the bottom. Knox strained the liquid through a piece of cloth from his own shirt. He poured it into a cup. He handed it to Hannah. She looked at the cup. She looked at him. She asked if it would poison her. Knox replied that hemlock is poisonous when raw, but after fermentation with a nitrogen-fixing agent, the toxins break down. Only the antidote remains. He added that he wouldn't waste one of his 3 seeds to poison a stranger. Hannah drank it. The taste was bitter. She grimaced. Nothing happened right away, but by evening she wasn't coughing. For the first time in 4 months, she went to bed and didn't wake up coughing in the middle of the night. On the morning of the 4th day, she went out into the garden. Knox was already there. He was kneeling in front of a garden bed, planting something. Hannah walked over. She looked at her wrists. The purple spots hadn't gone, but they had faded, just a little. The very edge of the largest spot had turned pink instead of purple. She sat down on the ground next to Knox. She asked what he was planting. He replied that it was the 2nd seed. She asked why. He replied that 1 dose wasn't enough. She needed a course of treatment, 7 to 10 doses. For that, he needed more roots with the right mycelium, and for that, he needed to grow the mycelium, and for that, he needed a seed. She asked how many he had left. 2. He had planted 1. 1 left. Hannah was silent for a long time. Then she asked why. Why was he spending on her what he'd stolen, risking his life? He just wanted a roof over his head. She'd already given him a roof, medicine beyond the contract. Knox didn't look at her. He kept loosening the soil around the planted seed. He answered simply. He said she was keeping notes in a notebook with a pencil. He'd seen the notebook on her desk. Her handwriting was neat. Her observations were detailed. She wrote down everything she saw in the garden, every day. Even when she was dying. Knox said he needed someone like that. He himself forgets half of it. Hannah stood up. She went into the house. She returned 20 minutes later with red eyes and a blank notebook. She placed it next to him. She said she would take notes. Knox nodded. He continued planting. A week later, the cough was completely gone. 2 weeks later, the purple spots had faded by half. The mycelium from the planted seed began to spread throughout the garden. Knox guided it with his hands, literally. He dug furrows, he laid out paths, he sprinkled in the necessary minerals. The mycelium went where he wanted it to. No botany textbook described what he was doing, because no textbook knew that mana now existed in the world. And Knox was learning all over again, every day, every hour, with every touch of the soil. By the end of the 1st month, Hannah Kim's garden was unrecognizable. 3 cleared beds, a functioning mycelium network, the first sprouts of something new. Hannah was recovering, and in Greystone, people began to whisper quietly. The girl in the greenhouse has some guy, a strange one, F rank, but he does something to the soil. And she stopped coughing. Knox spent his 2nd month in Greystone on his knees. Not out of humiliation, out of habit. He knelt before the garden beds for 12 hours a day and did what no one else in this world could. He listened to the soil. The soil identification skill revealed it to him layer by layer. Topsoil, subsoil, deep soil, temperature, moisture, mana content. An ordinary farmer saw numbers. Knox saw history. Every square meter of Hannah's garden told him what had grown there, what had died, what had tried to sprout and failed. The mycelium from a single planted seed had already spread over 30 square meters. It didn't behave like terrestrial mycelium. Terrestrial mycorrhiza grows slowly. This one grew quickly and purposefully. It reached toward the roots of plants as if it knew where to go. Knox observed. He recorded his observations through Hannah. Every evening he dictated his observations to her, and she wrote them down in a notebook in her neat handwriting. By the third week of the second month, the notebook was full. Hannah took out a second one. Knox began experimenting with crossbreeding. In the fields of Iron Dominion, he had seen how mana caused mutations in plants. Everyone considered it chaos. Knox saw a pattern. Mana amplified certain genetic lines. If two plants with the right mutations were crossed at the right moment in the lunar cycle with the right concentration of mana in the soil, it was possible to obtain a third generation with predetermined traits. What would take decades in conventional breeding could be achieved here in a matter of months. He started with tomatoes. Ordinary tomatoes from seeds that Hannah kept in a tin box in the kitchen. Knox planted 20 plants, 10 in a bed with mycelium, 10 without. After 2 weeks, the difference was visible to the naked eye. The tomatoes on the mycelium were larger, brighter, the leaves were denser. But the main difference Knox saw was through his skill. The fruits were accumulating mana. Just a tiny bit, 2% of a human's base mana reserve per fruit. A negligible amount. Any hunter would have laughed. A mana restoration potion from the dungeon provided 50% per dose. But the potion cost as much as an ordinary person's monthly wages. And the tomato grew in the garden, for free, consistently, without ingredients from the scene. Knox harvested the first crop, 14 fruits. Red, large, with a barely noticeable golden hue at the stem. Yuna brought one to Hannah. She took a bite and froze. She looked at the tomato. She looked at Knox. She said she couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten a real tomato, one that smelled like a tomato and not like plastic. Knox replied that it was because the mycelium gave the roots access to minerals that ordinary watering couldn't provide. Hannah laughed. For the first time in all the time he'd known her, she laughed without bitterness. The third month brought problems, and a person. The problem came in the form of a 24-year-old woman, tall, with a short haircut, with a spear on her back, and yellow eyes that moved like a predator's. She came to Greystone on foot, alone, with her left side bandaged. The bandage was brown with dried blood and something green. Poison. She walked into the only shop still open in town. She asked if there was a healer there. The shopkeeper looked at her for a long time. He said there was no healer, but there was a guy in the greenhouse. April. So was a D-rank hunter, Spearmaster class. A year ago, she was a member of a mid-tier guild and was considered a promising fighter. Then, during a raid in a C-rank dungeon, a poisonous monster pierced her left side with a spear. The poison settled in the wound. Ordinary healers wouldn't take the case. She needed a healer of at least B rank. The guild crunched the numbers. They decided it was cheaper to write her off. April was kicked out with the explanation that she was no longer cost-effective. She stood in the doorway of the greenhouse, spear on her back, arms crossed over her chest. She looked at Knox, who was kneeling in front of a tomato patch. She asked if it was true that he healed people. Knox didn't look up. He replied that he didn't heal people. He grew plants. Sometimes plants healed. April looked at Hannah. Hannah nodded. She showed her wrists. The purple spots had almost disappeared. April stepped closer. She turned around. She lifted the hem of her jacket. She showed him the wound. Knox finally got up from his knees. He walked over. He looked. The wound was nasty. The edges were black from the poison. Deep. It hadn't healed in 3 months. Classic toxic necrosis. In the old world, they treated it with antibiotics and surgery. In the new world, the monster's poison couldn't be cut out. It had spread through the tissue like mycelium. Knox leaned in closer. He sniffed. April flinched. She asked what he was doing. Nox replied that he was smelling it. The poison smelled like mushrooms, not earthly ones, underground ones. But a fungal base is a fungal base. Nox knew mushrooms. He returned to the garden beds. For 3 days he studied his fungal network. On the 4th day, he found what he was looking for. One of the mycelium's shoots had mutated under the influence of mana and begun producing a substance that Nox recognized by its smell. An antifungal alkaloid, a natural antibiotic, but not against earthly fungi, against subterranean ones. He cut off the shoot, ground it in a mortar that Hana had found in the attic, mixed it with oil that Hana had pressed from sunflower seeds in the backyard. The result was an ointment, dark, with a pungent smell. Nox applied the ointment to April's wound. She hissed in pain. She asked when it would heal. Nox replied that he didn't know. Maybe a month, maybe 3, maybe 6. April looked at him with the kind of gaze hunters give to people who waste their time. She asked if it could be done faster. Nox replied that it could be done faster, but then it wouldn't heal properly. A weak spot would remain. The next blow to the same spot would kill her. But if it healed slowly, the tissue would regenerate completely. He said he wanted it to heal properly, not quickly. April was silent. Then she sat down on a crate by the greenhouse wall. She set her spear down beside her. She said she would stay. Nox nodded. He went back to the garden beds. A week later, April was already standing in the greenhouse doorway every morning, arms crossed, the gaze of a predator, but directed outward. She was standing guard. No one had asked her to. She just stood in the doorway and didn't leave. Nox noticed. He didn't say anything. In the morning, he brought her a cup of tea made from leaves that relieved pain better than the painkillers from the dungeons. April drank in silence. The greenhouse in Greystone now consisted of 3 people, a botanist, an herbalist, a spearwoman. Nox was kneeling in the dirt. Hana was taking notes in a notebook. April stood in the doorway. By the end of the 3rd month, everyone in Greystone knew. The girl in the greenhouse has a boyfriend, F rank, a farmer. But he grows strange tomatoes, and he cures what no one else can cure, for free, for a roof over his head, for silence. The 4th month began with money, or rather the lack of it. Nox could grow anything, but couldn't buy anything. Seeds had to come from somewhere. Tools broke. The greenhouse windows cracked from night frosts. Hana spent her last savings on food for the 3 of them and kept quiet about it. Nox noticed. He always noticed. Not from her words, from the way Hana started slicing the bread thinner and serving the soup thicker to make it seem like there was more food. He sat down across from her at the table that evening. He placed 5 tomatoes in front of her, golden at the stem. He said it was time to sell. Hana looked at the tomatoes. She said no one would buy a tomato for decent money. Food was cheap. Monster cores and dungeon ingredients were what people valued. Nox shook his head. He said these tomatoes weren't food. They were consumables. 2% mana regeneration, consistent, cheap, doesn't require dungeon ingredients. Hunters spent huge sums on mana regeneration potions. Even 2% on a free tomato is a savings. Not for S ranks, of course. For them, 2% is a joke. But for D ranks and E ranks who count every coin. For those whom the guilds have written off as unprofitable. For people like April. Hannah thought about it. She nodded. But she said they had to sell quietly. Nox was a fugitive farmer from Iron Dominion. If anyone links the tomatoes to him, the guild will come. Nox agreed. We need a front. April volunteered. She knew the markets, knew how to talk to hunters, knew the slang and gestures, and that special look a buyer uses to check if they're being cheated. She took the first batch to the market in the neighboring town. 20 tomatoes in a canvas bag. She sold them in 4 hours. Not as food, as a low-rank consumable. 2% mana per fruit. The price was 10 times lower than dungeon potions. D-rank and E-rank hunters bought 3 or 4 at a time. Some tasted them right there. One guy took a bite of a tomato, froze. Looked at the system notification. Mana plus 2%. Looked at April. Asked where she got them. April replied that she got them from a farmer. Which farmer? It didn't matter which one. The guy bought 6 more. April returned with the money. Not much, but enough to buy glass for the greenhouse and decent food for 3 weeks. Knox looked at the money, looked at April, said that they needed to expand. Hannah didn't have a second greenhouse, but behind her plot stretched an abandoned wasteland. No one claimed it. Knox stepped out onto the wasteland. He got down on his knees. He activated soil analysis. The soil was poor, clayey, low in mana, low in organic matter, but alive, workable. It could be worked. He began digging. Every day, from dawn until noon, he worked in Hannah's garden. From noon until sunset, he dug the wasteland. April asked why he needed so much land. Knox replied that the mycelium needed space. The larger the area, the more mutation possibilities. The more mutations, the more opportunities. In the 6th week of the 4th month, the mycelium from the main plot had crawled to the vacant lot. Knox paved the way for it, literally. He dug furrows a palm's depth deep. He filled them with a mixture of peat and manure. The mycelium moved through the furrows like a train on rails. A week later, the entire vacant lot was crisscrossed by a network. Knox planted a new batch there. Not just tomatoes, basil, mint, sage, lavender. All from seeds he'd collected in the area, all ordinary. But on the mycelium with mana, the ordinary became extraordinary. The basil began to produce a substance that relieved muscle tension. The mint provided a mild analgesic effect. The sage enhanced concentration for 10 minutes after consumption. Each effect was negligible. Each was laughable compared to the dungeon herbs. But each was free. Each was reliable. Each required nothing but soil and time. Hannah was filling up her 3rd notebook, the 5th month. Tomatoes were selling steadily. April went to the market once a week. She came back with money and rumors. The rumors were interesting. People at the black market were talking about strange vegetables, cheap produce without underground ingredients. Someone was growing something that hadn't existed before. For now, it was just whispers. For now. Knox knew that sooner or later the whispers would grow louder, and sooner or later they would reach the Iron Dominion. They had to be prepared. In the 6th month, he produced what Hannah had recorded in her notebook as the Greystone tomato, the 3rd generation of a stable line, 2% mana per fruit without exception. A smooth golden hue at the stem, a flavor unlike any tomato on earth. Rich, sweet, with a hint of tartness, with an aftertaste that Hannah described as a warm evening. Knox didn't understand what she meant. Hannah said he'd understand when he tried to stop working for at least half an hour. 3 greenhouses. The first was Hannah's original. The second was on the vacant lot. The third was a small one that Knox had put together from old frames and plastic sheeting in the backyard for experiments. In the experimental greenhouse, he did what he was afraid to do outdoors. He was crossbreeding plants with the seed. The last one, the 3rd, the only one left of the 3 stolen from the Iron Dominion. He didn't plant it. He used it as a catalyst. He took pollen from ordinary plants. He touched the pollen with the seed. The seed gave off something. Energy. Information. Knox didn't know exactly what, but after contact with the seed, the pollen produced offspring with enhanced properties in the next generation. Over 6 months, he ran 17 plant species through that seed. The seed didn't shrink. It didn't weaken. It was alive. It was waiting. Knox could feel it. Not through skill. Through his fingers. Through what remained of his earthly botanical instinct. The seed was not a seed in the usual sense. It was a message from something big, something dormant, something that lay deep underground and waited for someone who would listen. By the end of the 6th month, Iron Dominion first heard about strange vegetables on the black market. A mid-level analyst at the guild's regional office wrote a report, 3 paragraphs. An unknown supplier is selling plant-based consumables with mana effects not of dungeon origin. Prices are 10 times below market value. Source unidentified. Recommendation: monitor. The report landed on the department head's desk. The head read it, shrugged, put it in a pile. Plant consumables with 2% mana. Nonsense, not worth the attention. He was wrong. The 7th month brought Sora Chong. She appeared without warning, just like everything that changes your life, not gradually, all at once. Knox was in the experimental greenhouse when he heard April's voice, sharp, alarming, the kind she used only when she sensed a threat. He stepped outside. A woman stood on the path in front of the main greenhouse, shoulder-length black hair. A long coat that cost more than all of Greystone. Dark eyes, tired. Above her head, letters glowed that Knox could see through the system. Archmage, S. April stood between her and the greenhouse, a spear in her hand. Hannah froze in the doorway. Knox looked at the woman. The woman looked at Knox. Sora Chong, 25 years old, a former classmate from Cornell. The very same girl who drank coffee with him at 3 in the morning in the greenhouse while he examined samples. The one who laughed at his habit of sniffing the soil. The one who, on the day of the rift, attained the Archmage S rank, and within 6 years became the country's most famous in the country. The face of the Hunters Association's advertising campaigns. A star, a legend, an astronomical income. She thought Knox was dead. 6 years. She had searched for his name on the lists of survivors. She didn't find him. F-rank farmers didn't make the lists. They weren't important enough to be counted. And now she stood before him, and he stood before her. In a shirt stained with dirt, with mud under his fingernails, smelling of compost and basil. F-rank, farmer, alive. Sora didn't say a word. She took 3 steps. She walked past April, who instinctively stepped back because S-rank is S-rank. She reached the nearest garden bed and sat right on it, on the tomatoes, on 3rd-generation Greystone tomatoes with a golden hue at the stem. Knox looked at the crushed bush. Sora sat on the ground and said nothing. 10 minutes. Knox waited 5. Then he went into the greenhouse. He came back with a cup of tea. He set it down next to her. He said she had dark circles under her eyes, just like she did before her thesis defense. He asked if she'd like a tomato. Sora looked up at him. The most powerful sorceress in the country was sitting in the dirt in the garden, looking at an F-rank farmer who was offering her a tomato. She said one word. "I will." Knox picked a tomato from the neighboring bush. He held it out to her. She took a bite, chewed slowly, swallowed. She said it was the best tomato she'd ever eaten in her life. Knox replied that it was because the mycelium provided the roots with access to minerals that regular watering doesn't. Sora laughed, quietly, with her eyes closed. The laughter faded into silence. Then she spoke. She told him she'd been looking for him, that she'd checked every list. That 3 years ago, she'd stopped looking, decided he was dead. That she'd come here by chance, heard at the market about strange vegetables from a small town, came to see out of curiosity. She thought some charlatan was selling dyed tomatoes. Knox said the tomatoes weren't dyed, that the golden hue at the stem was the result of mana accumulating in the cells of the fruit's epidermis. Sora laughed again. She said he hadn't changed, that the world around them had collapsed and been reborn, yet he was still explaining the color of a tomato through its epidermis. She stood up. She brushed off her coat. She looked at the greenhouse, at the garden beds, at Hannah in the doorway, at April with the spear, at Knox. She asked what he was doing here, seriously. Knox replied that he was growing things. Sora shook her head. She said she meant it seriously. She's an Archmage S. She senses mana. And what she senses on this patch of land has nothing to do with an ordinary farm. The mycelium network underground pulses with mana. The plants exchange energy. The soil breathes. She's never seen anything like this, not even in S-rank dungeons. Nox fell silent. He looked at Hana. Hana nodded. He turned to Sora. He said he'd show her. But first, she needed to take off her coat, because she'd crushed a tomato bush when she sat down on the garden bed, and now she'd have to help replant it. Sora Chong, S-rank, the face of the nation. She took off her coat, which cost as much as an apartment. She knelt down in the mud and replanted the tomato bush under the guidance of an F-rank farmer who explained to her how to properly tamp down the soil around the roots. April stood in the doorway. She watched this. She turned to Hannah. She quietly said that it seemed the world had finally gone mad. Hannah wrote it down in her notebook. Sora replanted the tomatoes until evening. Then they had dinner. 4 at the table. Hannah, Nox, April, Sora. Yuna was cooking. No, Yuna would show up later. For now, Hannah was cooking. A simple meal. Rice, vegetables from the garden, tomatoes, tea. Sora ate in silence. Nox told her what he deemed safe. About the mycelium, about crossbreeding, about mana mutations in plants, about the greystone tomato. He didn't mention the seed. He didn't mention the Iron Dominion. He didn't mention that he was a fugitive. Sora listened. Then she said that all of this was impossible. The system doesn't provide F-rank tools for that kind of work. Nox replied that the system provides tools to the class, and he uses human knowledge. The system doesn't forbid a botanist from knowing botany, it just doesn't take it into account. Sora was silent for a long time. Then she said she had to leave, that she had contracts, raids, obligations to the association. But she'd be back. Nox nodded. Sora stood up from the table. She put on her coat. There were patches of dirt on her knees. She looked at them. She didn't bother to clean them off. She left. April walked her to the road. She came back. She looked at Nox. She asked who that was. Nox replied that she was a classmate. April raised an eyebrow. She said that his classmate was the most dangerous woman in the country. Nox replied that in college she was afraid of spiders. April didn't know what to say. Hana jotted it down in her notebook. 2 weeks later, Sora returned, without warning, without a coat, in simple clothes, with a bag slung over her shoulder. She said she had 3 days off and that she wanted to understand how the mushroom farm worked. Nox gave her a shovel. 3 days later, Sora left. She returned a week later, then 10 days after that. A pattern emerged. Sora came to Greystone whenever she could, sometimes for a day, sometimes for 3. Every time she took off her coat, got down on her knees, worked with her hands. She was an S-rank archmage. She could have dug up the entire field with a single spell. Nox forbade it. He said her mana radiation disrupted the soil's pH within a 5-meter radius. Sora stared at him. She asked if he was serious. He was serious. He showed her the data via soil analysis. At the spot where Sora had sat on the garden bed on the first day, the pH had shifted half a point toward the alkaline side. The tomatoes on that bush bore fruit 20% smaller than the rest. Sora Jun, S-rank archmage, the face of the nation. For the first time in her life, she felt guilty for burned down the forest. No, for sitting on the garden bed. Nox said it was no big deal. The soil would recover in 2 weeks, but he asked her to sit on a bench next time. Sora nodded. Seriously, like a general receiving an order. The 8th month. Nox's farm was running. 3 greenhouses, 4 people. Greystone tomatoes on the black market. A network of mushroom beds under the entire plot. Hana is healthy. Rana. April is healing, slowly, properly. Sora arrives. She leaves. She returns. Everything is quiet. Too quiet. Nox knew that silence doesn't last forever, especially when you're a fugitive farmer from the world's largest guild. and especially when you have a seed in your right pocket that shouldn't exist. The 9th month began with chickens, or rather with the girl who brought them. She appeared at the market in the neighboring town on the day April was selling tomatoes. Small, red-headed, freckled, in a dirty jacket 3 sizes too big. 4 chickens followed her, not ordinary ones, feathers with a bluish sheen, eyes too intelligent for birds. She was selling eggs, blue ones the size of goose eggs. Buyers looked at the eggs and tapped their fingers against their temples. The girl was cursing. She said the eggs restored stamina and that she'd bred this strain herself for 3 years. No one was listening. An F-rank animal breeder, trash class. What could she possibly breed? April listened. She walked over. She bought 2 eggs. She tried one raw right there at the market. The system displayed a notification. Stamina up by 1.5% for 3 hours. April looked at the girl closely. She asked where she was from. The girl replied that she was from an abandoned farm in the mountains, alone, 3 years. She asked her name. Mira Hale O'Brien. April froze. The last name. Hale. She brought Mira to Greystone that same day. Knox was in the experimental greenhouse when he heard his name. He went outside. He saw a red-haired girl with a chicken under her arm. He looked at her for 5 seconds. Mira, a cousin on his mother's side, the American branch of the family. He thought she was dead. She thought he was dead. For 3 years, each of them thought they were the last one left. Mira didn't throw her arms around him. She set the chicken down on the ground. The chicken strutted importantly across the garden bed. Mira said the chickens lay blue eggs, that she'd bred them herself. 3 years of selective breeding, crossbreeding ordinary chickens with a wild bird from the foothills that had mutated under the influence of mana. 4 generations, feed control, selection by egg. Knox crouched down. He picked up the chicken, examined it. Feathers, eyes, legs, beak. Then he looked at Mira, asked if she'd done it herself. In 3 years. Mira nodded, warily. She was used to people laughing. Knox said quietly that it was Nobel Prize-worthy work. Mira stood there for a second. 2, 3. Then she burst into tears, loudly, at the top of her lungs. The chicken flinched in fear. April caught the chicken. Hannah came out of the greenhouse with tea. Knox stood in front of his crying cousin and didn't know what to do with his hands. He'd never been good at comforting people. He was good at comforting plants, so he did the only thing he could. He told her she needed to show him the farm in the mountains, that if she'd bred such chickens in 3 years without help, without equipment, without knowledge of mana mutations, then with his help, she'd breed a strain in a year that would change the entire market. Mira stopped crying. She wiped her face with her sleeve. She said she still had goats, with silvery... Knox raised an eyebrow. Mira stayed in Greystone, the 5th person, a botanist, an herbalist, a spearwoman, a cousin who was a beastmaster, and an archmage who came by whenever she could. Hannah started a separate notebook for Mira. She recorded the chickens' pedigrees, breeding charts, egg measurements. For the first time in her life, Mira saw her work being recorded, saw how seriously it was taken, saw that someone believed what she did mattered. The 10th month. Knox was driving with Mira to the mountains to her farm. April was riding with them. Security. 3 hours in an old truck that Hannah had borrowed from a neighbor. Mira's farm was small. A crooked house, a barn, a goat pen, a vegetable garden. Knox got out of the truck and knelt down. He activated soil detection and froze. The mountain soil was different. Mana flowed differently here, not scattered like in the valley, concentrated. The mountain rocks filtered the mana as if through a sieve, and it accumulated at specific points. Knox could see those points, bright spots on his skill map. 3, 4, 5. He raised his head, looked at Mira, asked if she knew there were 5 mana concentration points beneath her farm. Mira shrugged, said the goats always lay down to sleep in the same spots. Maybe that's why. Knox looked at the goats at their silvery fur, at how they lay in clusters at 5 specific spots in the yard. The goats sensed the mana. Mira's goats had been sleeping on these points of power for 3 years. Their fur absorbed the mana. The silvery sheen wasn't a color mutation, it was mana-saturated keratin. Nox sat down next to a goat. He touched the fur, soft, warm, with a slight tingling sensation on his fingers. This wool could be used to make mana-conducting fabric, light armor for mages, lining for healing gloves, things that cost a fortune on the market. And Mira had been shearing goats for 3 years and throwing the wool away because she didn't know what to do with it. Nox spent 2 days at Mira's farm. He mapped out the mana points. He took soil samples, wool samples, egg samples. He took 3 mountain rosehip bushes that grew right on a mana point and had mutated beyond recognition. Their fruits were black and smelled of something Nox couldn't identify. He would plant them in the experimental greenhouse, later. Right now, he had other things on his mind. On the way back, April was silent. Nox asked what was wrong. April replied that she'd seen footprints on the road, 2 or 3, heavy boots, military issue, heading toward Greystone, then turned back. Nox asked when. April replied that the tracks were fresh. A day, maybe 2. Someone had come, looked, left. Nox squeezed a handful of dirt in his pocket. The 10th month. On the desk of the regional chief of Iron Dominion lay a second report. Strange vegetables on the black market. Source, presumably the Greystone area. Tomatoes with mana regeneration. Basil with a muscle-relaxing effect. Eggs with a stamina bonus. All without underground ingredients. The chief read it again. Opened the first report from 3 months ago, compared them. The assortment had expanded, volumes had grown, prices were still 10 times lower than their dungeon counterparts. He pressed the call button, summoned the analyst, ordered him to identify the supplier. The analyst asked what the priority was. The boss thought, said medium. Medium for now. He still didn't understand what was going on, but he was starting to sense it. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong with these tomatoes. The 11th month. Layla Bay arrived at night. No knock, no warning. April sensed her first. She woke up, grabbed her spear, stepped out of the greenhouse into the darkness. The woman was standing by the fence. Black hair, glasses, a jacket that looked pressed even in the moonlight. Hands raised. In her right hand, a folder, cardboard, with the Iron Dominion logo on the cover. April pointed her spear at her. The woman introduced herself. Layla Bay, former Iron Dominion auditor, B-rank accountant. She said she hadn't come to fight. She'd come to warn them. April didn't lower her spear. She woke Nox. Nox came out. He looked at Layla, at the folder, at the logo. He asked why she was there. Layla handed him the folder. Nox opened it. Inside were documents, Iron Dominion internal reports, field maps, barracks layout diagrams, lists of farmers by number, and one document that made Nox stop. The Root System Project, classified, dated 2 years ago. Layla said that Iron Dominion knows about the seeds, has known for 2 years. The guild's fields aren't laid out by chance. They're located exactly where, 2 to 15 meters underground, seeds from the world on the other side of the rift lie dormant. Iron Dominion intercepts them, collects them, studies them, but cannot understand. Not a single one of their scientists has been able to germinate a single seed. Not a single one of their farmers has seen what Nox saw. But Nox saw it. And he left, and he took 3 seeds with him. Layla said that when Iron Dominion discovered the loss a month after Nox's escape, they checked the northern field. They found an empty space 2 meters deep, 3 holes, 3 seeds, gone. And then they started searching. Nox asked why she was here, why she was warning him instead of turning him in. Layla took off her glasses, wiped the lenses with the edge of her jacket, put them back on. She said that 6 months ago she had signed a document, an order to liquidate Farmers Barracks number 7 in the southern field. 23 people, trash classes, farmers, herbalists, gatherers, useless. The barracks were written off as unproductive. The people weren't transferred. They weren't let go. They were written off. Layla signed the paper because the paper was drawn up correctly. All the fields were filled out. All the signatures were in place. 23 people were dead on paper. Clean, neat, no traces. Layla hadn't slept since then. Knox listened in silence. He didn't interrupt. When Layla finished, he paused. Then he said he couldn't forgive her. It wasn't his place. 23 people whose names she didn't even know. He couldn't forgive on their behalf. Layla nodded. She hadn't expected forgiveness. Knox continued. He said he needed someone who could see the true value of things. His Class B accountant allows him to see the real market value of any item through the system. Knox grows things that have no market equivalence. He doesn't know how much they're worth. Without her, he'd be cheated on his very first serious deal. Layla looked at him. Knox looked at her. He said that atonement isn't forgiveness. Atonement is a new accounting system. Layla took off her glasses, put them on, took them off, put them on. Her hands were shaking. She nodded. In the morning, Layla sat at Hannah's desk with Iron Dominion documents spread out before her. She explained. The Root System project was launched 2 years ago when Iron Dominion geologists discovered anomalies beneath their fields. Seeds, thousands, tens of thousands, sleeping at various depths, not just beneath Iron Dominion's fields, beneath the entire planet. Everywhere there were faults. The Guild realized this was no random side effect. It was a deliberate infiltration. Something from the world beyond the faults was sowing its seeds into Earth's soil, slowly, patiently. 6 years. Iron Dominion set up farms at the points of maximum seed concentration, placed farmers there, trash class people, not out of charity, not as cheap labor, as censors, hoping that one of them would accidentally see what Knox saw and tell them. Knox didn't tell. Knox left. He took the seeds. And now Iron Dominion wants him back, not to kill him, to imprison him with a collar. Because he's the only one who made the seed do something. Layla added one more detail. The chain hadn't been after Knox yet. Iron Dominion's internal task force for asset recovery. So far, regular operatives had been searching, medium priority. But reports of strange vegetables had already landed on the regional chief's desk. Once he connects the vegetables to the fugitive farmer, priority 2247 will become top priority. And then chain will come. Knox asked how much time they had. Layla replied, a month, maybe 2. It depends on how quickly the analyst traces the sales chain from the market to Greystone. Knox nodded. A month, maybe 2. They had to hurry. No, Knox corrected himself. Hurrying is what combat classes do. He's a farmer. He needed to plan. By the end of the 11th month, 6 people were living in Greystone. Knox, Hannah, April, Mira, Layla, and Sora, who was coming by more and more often, sometimes for the weekend, sometimes in the middle of the week. She didn't explain why. Everyone knew why. Layla's first task was to tally up everything Knox had grown over the past 10 months. She activated her accountant skill. She looked at the Greystone tomato. The numbers in her eyes shifted. Market value, potential value, strategic value. She looked at the tomato. She looked at Knox. She said that if this tomato hit the open market in full volume, in 6 months it would crash the prices of low-rank dungeon potions by 30%. Knox replied that he was just growing tomatoes. Layla replied that no, he was growing a revolution, and it needs to be properly assessed. Otherwise, the revolution will go bankrupt. The 12th month, 1 year after the escape. Knox stood in the experimental greenhouse in front of a pot in which something was growing that he himself couldn't believe. The last seed, the third of the 3 stolen from the Iron Dominion. The one he had used as a catalyst for 6 months. A month ago, he made up his mind. He planted it. Not in ordinary soil, in a special mixture he had been preparing for 3 weeks. Soil from Mira's mountain farm, peat from Hana's garden, compost with mycelium, mana-saturated clay from one of the 5 points of power. Everything mixed in proportions that Knox had calculated based on a year's worth of observations. The seed sprouted on the 3rd day, and a stem rose from the ground, dark, almost black, with golden veins. After 2 weeks, the stem became a trunk, thin but hard as bone. After 3 weeks, the first leaves appeared. They weren't green, dark blue with a silvery sheen. They glowed at night, dimly, barely noticeable, but Knox saw it. A month later, the tree was half a meter tall. Knox sat in front of it every evening. He watched. He activated soil identification. The skill showed something impossible. The tree's root system extended 4 meters down in a month. A normal tree grows 20 to 30 centimeters in a month. This tree was sinking into the ground as if searching for something. Hana took notes every day: height, trunk thickness, number of leaves, color, glow, temperature around the pot, mana level. The data defied all expectations. Layla activated her accountant skill on the tree. She looked. She paled. She said the system couldn't determine its value. Instead of a number, her interface displayed a word: priceless. She was seeing that word for the 2nd time in her life. The first time was when she was appraising the contents of an Iron Dominion director-level vault. Knox called it a mana tree because he didn't know what to call it properly. It was a tree from the world beyond the rifts, a relic, a living creature that shouldn't grow in Earth's soil. But it grew, because Knox gave it what it needed: the right soil, the right mycelium, the right patience. In the 6th week after planting, the mana tree bloomed. 1 flower, small, white with a golden center. The scent filled the greenhouse. Hana walked in and froze. She said it smelled like a morning after the rain. April said it smelled like the grass she used to lie on as a child. Mira said it smelled like her mother's garden. Everyone sensed something different. 2 weeks later, the flower became a fruit, small, round, golden. Knox picked it. He examined it. Activated his skill. The system displayed information he had never seen before. The fruit of the mana tree. Rank undetermined. Effect: complete restoration of mana channels. Side effects unknown. System warning: this object is not listed in the catalog. Use at your own risk. Knox held the fruit in the palm of his hand. Golden, warm. It pulsed, like a heartbeat. Knox understood, not through a skill, through everything he knew about plants and life. This fruit healed what was considered incurable. Mana channels that had been damaged, destroyed, scorched. Hannah's channels, burned by mana toxicosis. April's channels, poisoned by a monster's venom. Then of all those whom the system had written off as broken, 1 fruit per season. 1. Knox stood in the greenhouse and understood the scale of what he had gotten himself into. This wasn't about tomatoes, not about the black market, not about survival. Beneath the ground lay an entire flora from another world, and he was the first to grow a tree from it. Hannah stood nearby. She looked at the fruit, then at Knox. She asked quietly what they would do. Knox replied that he would give the fruit to whoever needed it most. He looked at April. April's wound was healing, slowly, properly, but the mana channels around the wound were dead. The ointment healed the tissue, but not the channels. April would remain a D rank forever with damaged channels. She would always be a little slower, a little weaker, a little closer to death in every battle. Knox held out a fruit to her. April looked at it. She asked what it was. Knox explained, briefly. A fruit of the mana tree. It restores mana channels, completely, once. 1 fruit per season. and he was giving it to her. April didn't take it. She looked at Hana. Hana's mana channels were damaged too. Her mana toxicosis was cured, but traces remained. Hana shook her head. She said she was an herbalist E. She didn't need her mana channels as much. April was a spearwoman D. She needed her channels more. April took the fruit. She ate it. A minute later, she bent over. After 2 minutes, she straightened up. After 3, she looked at her hands. She activated the system interface. Mana channels. Full restoration. For the first time in a year. She looked at Nox. He was already kneeling in front of the mana tree, checking the soil. April opened her mouth, closed it, left the greenhouse. Stood in the doorway, with her back to them. She stood there for 20 minutes. When she returned, her eyes were dry. Her voice was steady. She spoke a single sentence. She said that no one would touch this greenhouse again as long as she was alive. Nox nodded. He continued checking the soil. By the end of the 12th month, Nox had legalized the farm. Layla helped. She arranged everything through a front registration. The Greystone Farming Cooperative. On paper, the owner was Hannah Kim, an E-rank herbalist. Legal class, legal registration. Nox Hale's name didn't appear anywhere. He was a shadow in his own home, a ghost who planted and watered and kept silent. The first year was over. A year ago, he had stood barefoot in the Iron Dominion field with the number 2247 on his robe. Now, he had 3 greenhouses, a mushroom farm, a mana tree, 6 people who called this place home, and 7 of Hannah's notebooks filled with observations that had no parallel in any scientific database in the world. The 13th month, Yuna Park. April found her at the market, or rather she heard her. Yuna was yelling at a customer in 3 languages, Korean, English, and a third language April didn't recognize. The argument was about tomatoes, Greystone tomatoes that Yuna had bought from April a week ago. Yuna had made soup out of them. She added basil. The tomatoes' mana regeneration combined with the muscle-relaxing effect of the basil. The soup provided both effects at the same time. The customer insisted that the basil should be replaced with dill. Yuna explained to him that dill kills the mana regeneration in the tomato because dill's essential oils neutralize the mana-containing alkaloids, that basil was needed and only basil. The customer wouldn't listen. Yuna took out a frying pan, not to hit him, although April wasn't sure. Yuna Park, 23 years old, culinary class C, useless to the guilds. A cook isn't needed in a dungeon. A cook doesn't kill monsters. A cook makes soup. But Yuna made soup that worked. She understood that ingredients weren't just food, that every vegetable, every spice, every herb had properties, and that those properties could be enhanced or destroyed by the method of preparation. Temperature, time, combination, order of addition. Yuna knew this intuitively, not through the system, through her grandfather. The last living bearer of traditional Korean cuisine in her region. Her grandfather died in the first year of the rift. Since then, Yuna had been cooking for a shadow. Every evening, she set an extra plate. April brought Yuna to Greystone. Yuna entered the greenhouse. She looked at the garden beds, at the tomatoes, at the basil, at the mint, at the sage, at the manadera tree in the corner. Then she looked at Nox, who was kneeling in the dirt, as usual. She asked if this was the farmer who grew strange vegetables. Nox nodded. Yuna walked through the greenhouse. She touched the leaves. She sniffed. She tasted them with her tongue. She stopped. She walked on. Nox watched. She was doing the same thing he did, only not with the soil, with taste. She read the plants through taste, just as he read them through the soil. Yuna stopped in front of the basil bed. She plucked a leaf, chewed it, spit it out. She turned to Nox. She said the basil had been picked at the wrong time. It should have been before 10 in the morning. After 10, the essential oils begin to break down under the influence of the mana from the soil. Harvesting in the evening yields half the effect. Nox stood up from his knees. For the first time in a long while, someone had told him something about his plants that he didn't know. He looked at Yuna with that expression Hana had already learned to recognize. Interest. Pure botanical interest. Only directed not at the plant, but at the person. Yuna stayed, the sixth person on the team. She took over Hana's kitchen on the very first day. She rearranged the shelves, she moved the jars, she hung bunches of herbs on the walls. By evening, the kitchen smelled so good that April came in 3 times just to stand in the doorway. Yuna was cooking with what Nox had grown, and it turned out that this changed everything. A Greystone tomato yielded 2% mana when raw. In Yuna's soup, with the right basil picked before 10 in the morning, it yielded 3.5%. Mint provided a pain-relieving effect for half an hour. In Yuna's tea with sage and a drop of mountain honey, the effect lasted 2 hours. The C-rank chef did with plants what Nox couldn't. She unlocked their potential, like a key unlocks a lock. The right temperature, the right time, the right combination, and the plant gave everything it had. Nox looked at the numbers. Layla did the math. If Yuna cooked with his harvest, the value of the produce would triple. Not because of the volume, because of the quality. Nox approached Yuna that evening. She was washing dishes. He placed a small bag on the table next to her. Yuna looked at it. She asked what it was. Nox replied that they were seeds, vegetables from her grandfather's recipe. He found them in the university archives. Cornell's digital seed bank catalog had survived on one of the servers that Layla helped locate. Nox spent a week searching. 3 varieties: Korean chrysanthemum for salad, red perilla, and wild sesame, which no longer existed anywhere else. Yuna took a small bag. She opened it. She looked at the seeds. Then she left the kitchen. She was gone for 40 minutes. She returned with reddened eyes and a small frying pan. She said that tomorrow morning she would make breakfast for everyone, a real one, just like her grandfather used to make. No one objected. The end of the first year. 7 people at the table: Nox, Hannah, April, Sora, who had come for the weekend, Mira, Layla, Yuna. On the table was what had grown on their land, prepared by Yuna. Tomatoes, basil, rice with herbs, soup, tea. Simple food, real food. Sora picked up a tomato. She looked at it. She said quietly that 6 years ago she thought the rift had taken everything from her, and today she's eating a tomato grown by a friend she thought was dead. That she doesn't know what kind of world this is, but she wants to stay in it. No one answered. Yuna went into the kitchen. Nox stared at his plate. Hana opened her notebook. She wrote a single sentence. Today we had dinner as a family for the first time, the 14th month. The silence ended. An Iron Dominion analyst traced the chain: the market, the buyer, the seller, April, Greystone, the farmers' cooperative. 3 weeks of work. The medium priority became the highest the moment the analyst opened the registry of fugitive farmers and saw number 2247, the northern field. 3 seeds, missing. The report landed on Chain Commander Kane Weller's desk, a former A-rank paladin. He'd switched to corporate security for money and stability, a weary professional with gray eyes and a habit of drinking coffee without sugar. He read the report. He read the appendix. The Root System Project. Seeds. A fugitive farmer. Strange vegetables. Mana effects without underground ingredients. Kane drank his coffee and thought. An F-rank farmer, trash class, ran off with a handful of dirt and 3 seeds. And in a year he built something that crashes market prices by 30% within a 2-city radius. It didn't make sense. Kane didn't like things that didn't make sense. He assembled the chain. 6 people, all former B and A-rank combat classes, all professionals, all accustomed to retrieving Iron Dominion assets quickly and quietly. The mission was simple. Greystone, the farming cooperative. Find farmer 2247, bring him back alive, and take everything he'd grown. The chain left in the morning. Layla found out 3 hours later. She still had contacts in Iron Dominion, one person who still answered the phone, who said 2 words: the chain, Greystone. Layla ran to the greenhouse. Knox was on his knees in front of the mana tree. He looked up, saw her face. He understood everything. He stood up. He asked how long it would take. Layla replied the chain would be here by nightfall, 12 hours, maybe less. Knox walked around the greenhouses. He looked at every bed, at every bush, at every sprout. A year's work, thousands of hours on his knees. The mycelium network he had laid out with his own hands. Tomatoes, basil, mint, sage, experimental hybrids, mountain rosehip from Mira's farm, and the mana tree, the only one in the world, with 1 fruit per season. The next fruit in 5 months. He couldn't take it all. Knox made his decision in 10 minutes. Hannah gathered the notebooks, all 7 of them. The records were more important than the beds. The beds could be replanted, the records couldn't. Layla was gathering documents. Mira was catching chickens, 4 blue hens that clucked as if they sensed what was happening. Yuna was packing seeds, every single one, every little bag, every jar. Knox was digging up the mana tree, carefully, like a surgeon. The roots went 4 meters deep. He couldn't get it all. He cut it off with a knife. Every cut felt like an amputation. The tree shuddered. He could feel it through his fingers. It was alive, truly alive, not like an earthly tree, like a creature. He wrapped the root ball in a damp cloth. He placed the tree in a pot. The pot was small. The tree was 6 feet tall. It leaned. Knox pressed it to his chest. April stood at the gate. Spear in her hands. She wasn't going to run. She was going to fight. Knox walked over to her. He said they had to leave. That was it. April shook her head. She said she would hold them off, that he should go, that the mana tree was more important. Knox looked at her. He said the mana tree wasn't more important, that nothing was more important, that they were all leaving or not leaving at all. April gripped her spear. She wanted to argue. Knox said one more thing. He said that the mana tree bore only 1 fruit per season. 1 fruit heals 1 person. If April died here, then in 5 months there would be no one to protect him when he carried that fruit to someone who was dying. He needed her. Alive. Not heroic. Alive. April was silent for 3 seconds. Then she turned around. She walked toward the truck. Knox was the last to walk around the greenhouse. He looked at the rows he was leaving behind, at the mycelium network pulsing beneath the ground, at the earth that had become his home for a year. He stepped out, got into the truck, Hannah at the wheel, Mira with the chickens in the back seat, Layla with the documents, Yuna with the seeds. April was on the roof of the truck with a spear. Knox had the man tree on his lap. They left 4 hours before the chain arrived. Kane Weller entered the empty greenhouse at 1 in the morning. The glass was intact, the beds were untouched, the tomatoes were still red on the vines. But there were no people, no tree, no tetrad, no seeds. Kane walked through the greenhouse. He crouched by a garden bed. He touched the soil. He looked at a tomato. He picked one. He took a bite. He chewed slowly. A system notification. Mana up by 2%. Kane looked at the tomato. F-rank farmer, trash class, growing what the entire Iron Dominion corporate machine can't grow, and managed to get away 4 hours before the chain. Kane finished his coffee. He set the empty cup on the garden bed. He took out his communicator. Reported that the target had left, property partially abandoned. The pursuit begins. Then he looked at the garden bed, at the mycelium that glowed blue underground if viewed from the right angle. And for the first time in 10 years of service with Iron Dominion, he thought that maybe he didn't understand something. Mira's mountain farm became his new home, a ramshackle house. A barn, a goat pen, and 5 underground shelters underground where the goats slept every night. Knox wasted no time. He spent his first day in the new place on his knees. He walked the entire plot, every square meter. He activated soil detection over and over until his head buzzed. The mountain soil was different, richer, deeper. Here, mana didn't flow diffusely, but through channels, like underground rivers. The 5 points were the intersections of these rivers, nodes. Nox smiled. Here, it would grow bigger than in Gracetown, much bigger. He planted the mana tree at the strongest of the 5 points, right in the center. The tree looked sick after being transplanted. The leaves drooped, the trunk darkened. Nox watered it every 4 hours, talked to it, not with words, with his hands. He touched the bark, he checked the soil around it. He added a mixture he'd prepared from mountain peat and mushroom mycelium. On the 3rd day, the tree straightened up. On the 5th, the leaves lifted. On the 7th, a new shoot appeared. Nox exhaled, for the first time in a week. Hannah organized the space. The house was small for 7 people. 2 rooms, a kitchen, an attic. Hannah and Mira took 1 room. Yuna and Layla took the 2nd. April slept in the shed. She said it was more comfortable for her, that she could hear better from there if anyone came. Nox slept in the greenhouse, next to the man tree. Not out of romance. After being transplanted, the tree needed constant attention. He woke up every 4 hours or so. He'd check on it, water it, go back to sleep. 2 weeks later, they started building. Nox was in charge. April dug. Mira hauled stones. Hannah laid out the plans. Layla counted the materials. Yuna cooked. Sora arrived on the 4th day of construction, without a coat, in work clothes, with a bag from which bundles were sticking out. Money. A lot of it. She placed the bag in front of Nox, said it was her fee for the last raid. An S-rank dungeon, 3 days' work, the full amount. Nox looked at the bag, looked at Sora, said he couldn't take her money. Sora replied that it wasn't her money, it was an investment. Layla would handle the accounting. Everything was official. The Greystone Cooperative was opening a mountain branch. Investor S. Chong. Nox looked at Layla. Layla nodded. She'd already done the math. Nox took the bag. The money went towards supplies, glass for greenhouses, irrigation pipes, tools, seeds from the nearest town. A month later, 2 new greenhouses stood on the mountain farm. Professional ones, with glass, with an irrigation system, with heating for the winter. Nox started over. He built the mushroom network from scratch, but faster than in Gracetown. He already knew how, knew the proportions, he knew the roots. He knew what minerals the mycelium needed to grow in the right direction. In 3 weeks, the network covered both greenhouses and spread out into the open area. It stretched toward the mana points, like a river to the sea. The mycelium drank mana from the power points and grew denser, brighter, more active. The plants on it grew twice as fast as in Greystone. The tomatoes were no longer yielding 2% mana, but 3%. The basil didn't just relieve muscle tension, but repaired minor damage to muscle tissue. The mint provided pain relief for 2 hours instead of 30 minutes. The mountain soil amplified everything. The 15th month. Nox noticed something strange. The mana tree was behaving differently. It was growing faster than in Greystone, much faster. It had grown 1/2 meter in a month. It was now 1.70 meters, almost as tall as Nox. The roots went 6 meters down, and they weren't just going down, they were reaching for something. Nox activated soil detection to maximum depth, 8 meters, 10, 12. At a depth of 15 meters, he saw something. Not seeds, not roots. A structure. Huge. Alive. Pulsating. It stretched in all directions beyond the reach of his skill, as if beneath the mountain lay the root system of a tree the size of a city. Nox sat on the ground and looked down through his skill. His hands didn't tremble, but his heart was beating faster. He knew that the seeds he'd found beneath the fields of the Iron Dominion weren't just seeds from another world. They were part of something bigger. Layla had spoken of the Root System Project, of seeds beneath the entire planet. Now Nox saw why the project was called that. Because beneath the earth truly lay a root system. One. Whole. Alive. An organism the size of a continent, sleeping, but waking up. And his mana tree was reaching toward this organism with its roots, like a child reaches for its mother. Nox didn't tell the team, not yet. He needed to understand more, but he started writing it down, not through Hannah, by himself, in a separate notebook, in small handwriting, 1 page a day. Observations of what lies beneath the ground and of how the system reacts to him, because the system had started acting strangely. A little softer. Notifications came a little later. Skill hints were a little more detailed, as if someone had turned a knob, just a little, half a turn. Nox didn't understand why, but he was a nerd. He knew how to wait and observe. The 16th month, Nox started teaching. It didn't happen according to plan. Hannah asked. She said that she'd been taking notes for a year but didn't understand half of what she was writing down, that she wanted to understand, that she wanted to be able to do what he could do. Nox looked at her. He thought. He nodded. The first lesson took place in the greenhouse. Nox knelt in front of the garden bed. Hannah was beside him. He took her hand, placed it on the ground, said she needed to feel the temperature, not through skill, with her fingers. Hannah felt it. The earth was warm. Nox asked where it was warmer, left or right. Hannah thought. Left. Correct. A branch of the mycelium ran along the left, conducting mana and warming the soil by 1/2 degree. Hannah couldn't see the mycelium, but she felt the warmth. Nox said this was just the beginning. Mira joined them on the 2nd day. Her Beastmaster skill gave her a sensitivity to living beings. The mycelium was alive. Mira sensed it differently than Hannah, not as warmth, as movement, as a quiet hum beneath her fingers. Nox corrected her, explained, demonstrated. Yuna arrived on the 3rd day. She was interested in something else. She wanted to understand when to harvest. At what time of day does the plant contain the maximum amount of nutrients? Nox explained photosynthesis and mana, about morning and evening cycles, about how the mana saturation of the soil affects the movement of sap in the stem. Yuna listened like no one else, with eagerness, with hunger. She asked questions that made Nox pause and think. Layla didn't teach botany. She taught the economics of botany. Every evening they sat at the table. Layla showed the numbers, the cost of a tomato, the market price of a comparable product, the margin, logistics, risks. Nox listened. He didn't half of it. But Layla explained patiently, just as he had explained mycelium to her, an exchange of knowledge. April hadn't learned how to plant. April had learned how to protect what was planted. She walked around the mountain farm. She found 3 access trails. She blocked 2 with barricades. She left the 3rd, 1 narrow, visible. She set up a system of signal threads along the perimeter, thin ropes tied to jars filled with stones. Primitive, but it worked. No one could approach the farm unnoticed. Sora came less often. The Hunters Association kept her busy. S-rank dungeons were opening more frequently. Monsters from the rifts were growing stronger. The world beyond the mountain farm was becoming more dangerous. But when Sora came, she would sit next to Nox and listen. He told her about what he had seen underground, about the structure, about the organism. Sora listened and remained silent. Then she said she could sense it. As an archmage, she could sense mana. And what lay beneath the mountain wasn't just mana. It was something alive, huge, breathing. The 17th month. Nox did something he had never done before. He ventured beyond the farm. Not physically, through people. Layla organized a sales network, not through a single market, through 5, in 5 different cities, 5 different frontmen. Each sold a different product. Tomatoes in one city, basil in another, Mira's eggs in a 3rd, wound ointment in the 4th, sleep tea in the 5th. No connection between the sellers, no traces leading back to the mountain farm. Layla knew how the Iron Dominion operated. She knew how they searched, through financial flows, through recurring patterns. She broke every pattern. Each seller received their goods from a different courier. Each courier knew only one name, a chain with no links. The money went through 3 dummy accounts. Layla hadn't slept, literally. She counted through the nights. She checked, double-checked. Knox noticed. He brought her tea. That one, from the plant that cures insomnia. Layla looked at the cup, at Knox, took off her glasses, put them on. She drank it. The next night she slept, for the first time in a long time, 8 hours. Knox didn't tell her what he'd added to the tea, not a sleeping pill, just the right proportions. A plant that relaxes the body, another that calms the mind, a third that regulates the heartbeat. 3 ingredients for a specific person. For Layla, who doesn't sleep because she counts the dead. 18 months. A year and a half after the escape, Ion Dominion had lost the trail. Kane Veller's team had searched Greystone. They found empty greenhouses, a mushroom farm that kept running without its owner, tomatoes that kept growing, but they found no people. Kane reported that the target had presumably left the region. He recommended expanding the search. Iron Dominion headquarters expanded it. But the world was big, and a single F-rank farmer was small. They were looking in the wrong direction. Knox wasn't down in the valley. He was up above, in the mountains, where no one was looking. Because there are no dungeons in the mountains, no fissures, nothing of value, just rocks and goats. And one farmer who was growing the future. The 20th month. The mana tree had grown to 3 meters. Its canopy spread over the mana point like an umbrella of dark blue leaves. At night, the leaves glowed gold, dimly, like embers in a fire that hadn't yet gone out. During the day, they were simply dark, thick, so dense that a shadow always lay beneath the canopy, even at noon. Knox came to the tree every morning before dawn. He sat down nearby. He placed his palms on the ground at the base of the trunk, and he listened, not with his ears, with his fingers. Through soil sensing, he could see the roots. They ran downward like black rivers, thick, branched. At a depth of 3 meters, they fanned out. At 5 meters, they began to twist into spirals. At 8, they became as thin as threads. At 10, they almost vanished from his range of perception. But Knox knew they went further. Every morning a meter deeper than yesterday. At 11 meters, he noticed that the threads had begun to change direction. They stopped going straight down. They veered southeast, all at once, as if something were pulling them, as if something were calling. The roots went down 12 meters, and Knox now knew where they were going. They had connected to an underground structure. He had seen the moment of connection through soil identification on Thursday, at 3:17 a.m. He wasn't asleep. He was lying in the greenhouse next to the tree and staring at the ceiling when the skill activated on its own, without his command. For the first time in 2 years, the skill had done something without being asked, as if the system had decided he needed to see this. The thinnest root of the mana tree touched something 12 meters deep, something solid, alive, pulsating. The contact was instantaneous, like an electrical circuit closing. Knox felt a pulse through the skill, short, powerful, like a heartbeat. A wave ran through his entire body, from his toes up his spine to the back of his neck. He sat down. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from the intensity of the sensation. Then silence. A second, 2, 3, 30. Then another beat, just as powerful. Knox counted. 2 beats per minute. A rhythm. Steady. Even. Like the pulse of a sleeping creature. The mana tree began to change the next morning. Knox noticed the difference when he stepped out of the greenhouse with the cup of tea Yuna had left for him on the porch. The trunk. It had grown thicker overnight, 3 centimeters in diameter. Knox wrapped his arms around it. Yesterday his fingers had closed around it. Today they didn't reach each other. The bark had changed texture. It had been rough. Now it was smooth with a metallic sheen. As if the tree had donned armor. Knox ran his hand along the trunk. Warm, warmer than the air around it. The leaves had become brighter. The dark blue had turned into a deep indigo with silver veins. Each leaf was like a small map with rivers of silver. Hana approached. She saw it. She opened her notebook. She began to write. Nox dictated. The trunk's diameter had increased by 3.2 centimeters overnight. The bark temperature was 28 degrees with an air temperature of 14. The color of the leaves had changed. The structure of the veins had changed. Hana wrote quickly. Her handwriting had become smaller over the past year. She was saving space in her notebooks. Nox asked Mira to bring a thermometer from the shed. He measured the soil temperature at the base of the tree, 34 degrees. 10 meters from the tree, 16, a difference of 18 degrees. The tree was warming the ground around it. The mycelium in the heated zone was 3 times more active. The plants near the tree looked like they were in the height of summer, even though it was early autumn outside. The tomatoes were swelling. The basil was blooming for the second time this season. The mint had grown to the size of a small bush. The fruits had changed too. The second fruit of the season ripened 3 weeks early. Nox noticed it on the morning of the 8th day after the roots had connected with the underground structure. The fruit hung on the lowest branch, golden, larger than the first, the size of a peach. The first fruit was the size of a walnut. This one was twice as big, and it was pulsing, visibly, not through skill, with his eyes. The golden surface of the fruit gently swelled and subsided, twice a minute, in rhythm with the underground pulse. Nox picked it up, carefully, with both hands. The fruit's skin was warm and slightly damp, like the palm of a living creature. He held it before him. The system displayed new information, text he had never seen before. Mana tree fruit, rank D. Effect: complete restoration of mana channels and partial restructuring of rank restrictions. Side effect: possible alteration of the perception of mana flows. Rank D. Nox read it 3 times. The first fruit had no rank at all. The system refused to classify it. The second received a D, not a high rank, but a rank nonetheless. The system had begun to recognize the mana tree, to include it in its classification. The tree was growing, in both the literal and systemic sense. And one more detail, a partial restructuring of rank restrictions. Nox didn't know exactly what that meant, but he had a hunch. Rank restrictions are the ceiling the system sets for each class. A farmer F cannot become a farmer E. Herbalist E cannot become herbalist D. The ceiling is built into the system, unchangeable. Or so it was believed. The fruit said that the ceiling could be shifted, not removed, shifted, partially. Nox stood with the fruit in his palm and thought. Layla approached. She looked at the fruit. She activated her accountant skill. Her eyes widened. She took a step back. She said she couldn't determine the market value, that the system was showing her an infinity symbol next to the price. She had seen something like that once in her life, when she was auditing the personal vault of the director of Iron Dominion. There lay an SS rank dungeon artifact, the only one in the world. The system had also shown its value as infinity. Layla looked at the golden fruit in the F-rank farmer's palm. Then she looked at Nox. She took off her glasses, wiped them, put them back on. She said quietly that if Iron Dominion found out about this, it wouldn't be the chain coming for him. The board of directors would come, in person, with an army. Nox nodded. He put the fruit in his pocket. He went to look for Hana. Hana was sitting in the greenhouse. She was writing down yesterday's observations. She looked up when Nox entered. He sat down across from her. He placed the fruit on the table between them. Hana looked at it. She asked what it was. Nox explained. The second fruit, rank D. It fully restores mana channels and possibly raises the rank ceiling. Hana looked at the fruit, then at Nox. She asked who he was giving it to. Nox replied that it was for her. Hana froze. Then she began to refuse. She said she didn't deserve it, that she was a rank E herbalist, that she didn't need strong channels, that there was April who was a fighter, there was Mira who was a rank F beastmaster and needed it too. There's Sora, whose channels are fine, but she's an S rank and the fruit could strengthen her even more. There's anyone else, just not her. Knox listened. He waited for her to finish. Hannah spoke for 3 minutes. Then she fell silent. Knox said that was exactly why. Hannah didn't understand. Knox explained. April received the first fruit. Her channels have been restored. She's a D-rank fighter at full power, a beastmaster of the world. Her talent lies in working with animals, not with mana. Sora is S-rank. A D-rank fruit won't do her any good. She's above that. But Hannah the herbalist, E-rank, with damaged channels after mana toxicosis, with a sensitivity to plants she's been developing for 2 years, with notebooks full of observations no one else could have made. A herbalist with fully restored mana channels isn't just a herbalist E, it's something else. Knox said that a herbalist with restored channels will be able to sense plants through mana, directly, without a skill, without the system. She'll be able to do what he does through soil identification, but better, because a skill shows numbers and direct perception shows life. Hannah will be able to see the mycelium not as a map, but as a living network. She'll be able to feel every impulse, every connection, every exchange between the roots. She'll be able to keep records that he himself cannot keep, because he sees through the filter of a skill, and she would see directly. Hannah sat motionless, a notebook in front of her, a pencil in her hand. Knox waited. He didn't rush her. He never rushed anyone, not plants, not people. Hannah reached out. She took the fruit. It was warm, pulsing in her palm, twice a minute. She brought it to her lips, looked at Knox. He nodded. She took a bite. The flesh was golden, sweet with a hint of something floral she'd never tasted before. She finished the fruit in 3 bites, swallowed the last piece. For a second, nothing happened. Then warmth, from her stomach, up her spine, into her hands, into her legs, into her head. Hannah closed her eyes, opened them. A minute later, she looked at the greenhouse floor, at the trampled earth, and her eyes widened. She looked at Knox, told him what she saw. Mycelium, not like lines on a skill map, like living threads, white with a golden glow. Hundreds of threads, thousands, piercing the earth in every direction. Every thread pulsed, every pulse carried something, information, nourishment, signals. She saw one thread approach a tomato root and transfer a portion of mana to it. She saw the root respond, releasing sugar into the soil. The mycelium took the sugar and carried it to another plant. Symbiosis, exchange, conversation. Not a metaphor, a real conversation. The plants were talking to each other through the mycelium. And she saw it. Hannah could feel every strand, every connection, every pulse of mana running through the network. She stood up. She walked out of the greenhouse. She walked 10 meters to the basil bed. She crouched down. She placed her hand on the ground. And she laughed, quietly, in wonder, like a child seeing snow for the first time. She said the basil was asking for water. Not all the basil, the 3rd bush on the left. Its roots were slightly drier than the rest because it stood at the edge of the mana tree's heating zone and received more heat but less moisture. Knox approached, activated soil analysis, looked. She was right. The 3rd bush on the left. Soil moisture was 4% below optimal. Knox smiled. Hannah saw what he saw through his skill, but she saw it differently. He saw numbers. She saw life. Knox nodded. He said that now she could keep records that he couldn't keep himself, that her perception was a different perspective, that he needed both. His numbers and her intuition. Hannah cried, quietly, silently. She knelt before the basil bed and cried. Tears dripped onto the ground, onto the notebook she had already opened, onto the page she had already begun to fill, with new data, data that only she could see. Knox stood nearby. He was silent. Then he walked away to water the 3rd basil bush on the left. For the next 2 weeks, Hannah barely slept. She walked around the farm with her notebook and wrote everything down: how the mycelium reacts to rain, how the mana pulse in the soil changes depending on the time of day, how the mana tree communicates with wild earth trees through the shared mycelium, how Mira's chickens avoid certain patches of ground where the mana is too high, while the goats, on the contrary, lie down precisely there. Knox read her notes every evening. Sometimes he corrected them, more often he nodded. Even more often he paused and reread because Hannah described things he couldn't see through his skill, things that can't be expressed in numbers. She wrote that the mycelium sings, not with sound, with vibration, that every section of the network has its own rhythm, that the rhythm changes when Knox approaches a tree. It becomes calmer, smoother, as if the mycelium recognizes him. The 21st month. Knox gathered the team in the evening, all 7 of them, a table outside under a mana tree. The leaves overhead glowed with a soft golden. Yuna prepared dinner: rice with mountain herbs, soup made from 4th-generation Greystone tomatoes that yielded 3.5% mana without cooking, with Yuna's preparation 5%, a basil and mint salad that relieved fatigue for the entire night, rosehip tea from a mountain farm, black berries, a tart taste. The effect hasn't been fully studied yet, but after just 1 cup, Hannah slept like a log and woke up in the morning feeling as if she'd slept for a full day. Knox waited until everyone had finished eating. He watched as Mira fed the goats from the table, as April ate quickly and neatly, a fighter's habit. How Sora eats slowly, a look of quiet wonder on her face. Every time, every dinner, as if she can't believe food can be like this. How Layla eats with one hand while flipping through papers with the other. How Yuna doesn't eat at all until everyone else has tasted it and said it's delicious. Only then does she sit down, and she eats in silence, with her eyes closed, listening to her own food. Knox waited. When Yuna sat down and began to eat, he spoke. Then he told her everything, from the very beginning. From that night when the ability activated on its own at 3:17, from the moment the roots connected with the underground structure, from the pulse, 2 beats per minute, from the changes in the tree, from the warmth in the soil, from everything he'd been writing down in his separate notebook in small handwriting, 90 pages over a 1.5 years of observations. He told me about the underground structure, about what he saw through soil detection at maximum depth. A living network, a root system that stretched in all directions farther than his ability could reach. Not just roots, an organism, a whole one, huge. Not the size of a tree, not a forest, the size of a continent, sleeping beneath the earth since the discovery of the faults, maybe longer. He spoke of the roots of the man tree that had joined with it. Of how, after the connection, the tree began to grow 3 times faster, drawing nourishment from below, not from the soil, from the organism, like a branch grafted onto the trunk. He spoke of a pulse, 2 beats per minute, steady, constant, day and night, without pause, the pulse of a sleeping giant. He shared his theory, the one he'd been building brick by brick for a 1.5 years, from observations, from Hana's data, from records, from the intuition of a botanist who suggested things to him that cannot be proven, only felt. Faults are not an invasion, they are sprouting. 6 years ago, something came to Earth, not through the sky, through the ground, from below, from the depths. An organism sprouted into the planet's soil like a seed germinating in new Earth. The fissures are points of sprouting, places where the organism's tendrils broke through the surface. The monsters emerging from the fissures are not an invading army, they are antibodies, the organism's immune system. They react to what the organism perceives as a threat to people, to cities, to technology. The mana that has filled the world is not energy from another dimension, it is the organism's sap, its blood, its nourishment. It flows through the earth as sap flows through a tree, everywhere, constantly, invisibly. The system that assigned classes and ranks to everyone is not a game, not an experiment, not a punishment. It is a means of communication, the only one available to the organism. It does not know human languages. It does not know what speech is. It knows what classification is, categories, types. Just as a botanist classifies plants by genus and species, the organism classified people according to how they could be useful to it. Swordsmen, mages, healers. Each class is a role in the ecosystem the organism is building, and an F-rank farmer in this classification is not trash. Knox fell silent. He looked at each of them in turn. Then he said his final words. He said that in this organism's rating system, an F-rank farmer is the highest priority. One who knows how to listen to the roots, one who can be a mediator between the organism and the rest of the world. People just don't know this, because for 6 years, people have been looking up, at the faults, at the monsters, at the sky. But they should have been looking down. The silence at the table lasted 2 minutes. Sora spoke first. Her voice was steady, calm, professional. The voice of someone accustomed to receiving information that changes everything. She asked how he knew. Knox replied that he'd been observing for a year and a half, that the data was in his notebook, 90 pages, that he could show every entry, every measurement, every conclusion, that he wasn't 100% sure, but 80% sure. Sora nodded. 80% for a scientist is almost certainty. She knew that from her university days. Knox never said 100 unless he was 100% sure. April asked one thing. She asked if it was dangerous, the organism. Could it wake up and destroy everything? Knox answered honestly. He said it could, if you angered it, or frightened it, or tried to control it, like any living creature. But Knox doesn't think that's its goal. It slept for 6 years. It could have destroyed everything on the first day. It didn't. It created the system. It gave people classes. It gave them mana. It gave them a way to adapt. It doesn't destroy. It adapts, just as any organism adapts to new soil. The question is whether people will be able to live in this soil alongside him, or whether they'll try to uproot him. And then he'll respond, just as any organism responds to an attempt at destruction, with antibodies, with monsters, 100-fold. Mira listened with her mouth agape. Then she closed it, then opened it again. She asked what they could do. 7 people against the guilds, against the association, against a world that had spent 6 years preparing to fight what actually needed to be watered. Knox answered. 1 word. Teach. Silence. Layla took off her glasses. She looked at him with her nearsighted eyes. She said that this wasn't a business plan. Knox agreed. He said it was a sewing plan. Then Hannah looked up from her notebook. She had been writing the whole time while Knox spoke. She looked up and said she understood. Knox wasn't going to be the only one who knew how to work with the new flora. He wasn't going to be the key to the lock. A key can be broken, or stolen, or hidden in the Iron Dominion's vault. He was going to teach others, dozens, hundreds, to scatter the knowledge so widely that no guild would be able to gather it back, that the knowledge would sprout in people like mycelium sprouts in the soil, everywhere, simultaneously. Irreversibly. Knox nodded. He said that the land does not belong to the one who is stronger. The land belongs to the one who works it. And if in 2 years the world finds itself faced with a choice between a guild monopoly and free knowledge, by that point, there should be enough people who know what to do. Not a single greenhouse, not a single farm, a network, alive, growing like a mycelium. Yuna asked a practical question. She asked who to teach, where to find them, how to find people who could be trusted in a world where a bounty was on Knox's head. Layla answered before Knox. She said she had lists, the Iron Dominion registries, thousands of trash class people scattered across the country, farmers, herbalists, gatherers, animal breeders, all written off, all unnecessary, all forgotten. She knows their numbers, their towns, their statuses. She can find some of them. Knox looked at her. Layla put on her glasses. She straightened up. She said this was her bookkeeping, redemption in numbers. April asked how to teach. Knox is F rank, a fugitive. They're looking for him. He can't open a school, can't go public. Can't even go down to the nearest town without the risk of being recognized. Knox smiled, for the first time in a long time. The smile was quiet, botanical, as if someone had told a joke about nitrogen. Said he didn't need a school. He needs seeds, literally. Every seed he sends through Layla's network carries information, not metaphorically, for real. Mycelium, mutations, patterns, genetic memory of how to grow. The person who plants his seed and watches will see what he saw. Not right away, gradually, but they will see. Because the mycelium will show them, because the earth will teach them. Seeds are textbooks, the earth is the classroom, and the teacher doesn't need to stand at the blackboard. They need to plant. Sora remained silent for the rest of the conversation after the first question. She sat and looked at Knox. Then she stood up. She walked over to the man tree. She placed her palm on the trunk. She stood there for a minute. 2. She turned around. Her eyes were shining. She said the tree was warm and that she could feel its pulse, even through the bark. Even an S-rank archmage can sense what lies beneath the ground, if they want to. If she stops looking up and looks down. She looked at Knox, said he was right, that she'd been fighting antibodies for 6 years, killing monsters, clearing dungeons, and never once asked where they came from, why they came, what they wanted. She just killed. Because S-rank is what she does. Kills. Knox shook his head. He said that S-rank is what the system called her, but she is Sora, and Sora can be whatever she wants. Knox started that same week. For 3 days he prepared packages, seeds, not ordinary ones. He assembled each batch individually, for each recipient. Layla found the names, 12 people in 12 cities. Trash classes, all written off, all forgotten. Farmer F in Baltimore, Herbalist E in Denver, Gatherer F in Portland, Breeder F in Atlanta, and 8 more. For the farmer in Baltimore, Knox selected 4th-generation Greystone tomato seeds and a pinch of mycelium from a mountain mana point. For the herbalist in Denver, basil and sage with an active mutation, to each his own. Through Layla's network, he sent seeds to 12 locations. Each package came with a note, a short one, written in his own hand, in small handwriting. It told them what to do. Plant, observe.
Take notes. If you see a mycelium that glows, don't be afraid. It's normal. If you feel warmth in the ground, don't pull your hand away. It means you can hear. If you want to know more, write to this address. Out of 12, 8 responded. 4 didn't reply. Maybe they didn't receive it. Maybe they were scared. Maybe they decided it was a joke. But 8 replied, and that was enough. For now. The 22nd month. 8 students, 8 dots on the map that Layla hung on the wall of the stone house. Red pins stuck into the paper. Baltimore, Denver, Portland, Atlanta, Austin, Milwaukee, Richmond, Savannah. Every week, Layla received reports, short ones, handwritten, scanned using old phones, or simply photographed. The quality was terrible, but Knox read every single one. Twice, 3 times. A farmer from Baltimore wrote that the tomatoes sprouted on the 3rd day, that the mycelium was visible to the naked eye, white with a blue glow, that he got scared and wanted to dig everything up, but he reread the note. Don't be afraid. He left them. By the 2nd week, the tomatoes had set their first buds, ahead of schedule, much earlier. The farmer wrote that he had never seen anything like it. A herbalist from Denver wrote that the basil had mutated. The leaves had grown larger, the scent had changed, it had become deeper. He dried one leaf and brewed it. He drank it. He fell asleep 10 minutes later. He slept for 12 hours. He woke up without the headache that had tormented him for 3 years. He wrote 2 words,
How is this possible? Knox wrote a 4-page reply. He explained about mana mutations, about the mycelium, about the connection between the roots, about why basil harvested before 10 in the morning is more effective than evening basil. The herbalist read it. He wrote that he understood half of it. Knox replied that this was enough. The earth would reveal the other half. The 23rd month. Kane Veller found them. Not through sales, not through financial flows, not through students, through Sora. It was inevitable. Knox knew. Layla had warned him. Sora Chong, an S-rank archmage, was the most closely monitored person in the country. Her every move was recorded, every raid, every contract, every public appearance. The Iron Dominion analysts weren't stupid. They noticed a pattern. The country's most powerful S-rank archmage regularly disappears for 2 or 3 days. No raids, no contracts, for no apparent reason. Every 2 or 3 weeks, always in the same direction, north, into the mountains. A mid-level analyst, the very same one who had written the first report on the strange vegetables a year ago, mapped Sora's movements over the past 6 months, overlaid it on a topographic map, identified an area, a narrow one, a mountainous area 300 kilometers north of Greystown. He requested satellite data. The satellite thermal imager showed 7 heat signatures in an area where, according to the data, no one should be living. An abandoned farm, officially uninhabited since the first year of the rift. The report landed on Kane Weller's desk. Kane looked at the images. 5 structures, 2 of them new, built in the last 3 or 4 months. Glass, irrigation systems, greenhouses, professional ones. Smaller heat spots around them, garden beds, plantings, living soil, and a single tree. On the thermal imager, it glowed brighter than everything else, brighter than the greenhouses, brighter than the buildings, brighter than the people. The temperature at the tree's location exceeded the surrounding temperature by 20 degrees, like a lighthouse, like a signal fire. Kane drank his coffee and looked at the image. Then he opened the personal file. Farmer 2247, Knox Hale, F-rank, fugitive. Last known location, Greystone, 6 months ago. Escaped 4 hours before the chain's arrival. Kane remembered. He remembered the empty greenhouse, tomatoes on the vines, 2% mana, and the mycelium glowing blue underground. He remembered the taste of that tomato, rich, authentic, a taste that doesn't exist. He assembled the chain, full roster, 6 fighters, all vetted, all professionals, plus reinforcements from the Iron Dominion's regular forces, 6 additional people, 12 in total, A and B ranks, fully armed. The mission remains the same. Farmer 2247, alive, must be alive. Headquarters emphasized this 3 times in the order. Alive. And the tree? Whatever it is, do not damage it. Do not cut it down. Secure it. Wait for the special transport team. Kane asked Headquarters one question. He asked what kind of tree it was. Headquarters replied briefly, "The information is classified. Carry out the mission." Kane put away his communicator. He looked at the chain. 6 faces. Professional. Indifferent. They don't care what kind of tree it is. They're paid for results. Kane used to be like that too. They set out at night. 3 vehicles. No identifying marks. A mountain road, then a trail, then only on foot. Layla didn't find out in advance. Her contact in Iron Dominion had gone silent 3 days ago. He didn't reply to messages, didn't answer calls, transferred, or worse. Layla told Knox. Knox took note, didn't panic, but he started packing spare bags of seeds, just in case. The bags stood by the door. Yuna asked why. Knox replied it was a habit. Yuna looked at the bags, at Knox. She didn't say anything. She went to make dinner. April heard the cans, 3 in the morning. Stones clattered against the tin cans on the far perimeter. The sound was faint. Under normal circumstances, no one would have heard it except a person sleeping with one eye open. April slept exactly like that. She was on her feet in a second, spear in hand, barefoot. She stepped out of the shed. Darkness, silence, mountain air, cold, stars. Then the sound again, closer, the second line of the perimeter.
Someone was walking, carefully, professionally, avoiding the traps, but not all of them. One was triggered. That was enough. She woke everyone up. Knox stood up. He stepped out of the greenhouse. He looked into the darkness. He saw nothing. Human eyes can't see in the mountain darkness, but he had another way. He took off his boots. He stood barefoot on the ground. He activated soil detection. The ground beneath his feet vibrated. He felt pressure. Many feet. Heavy boots. Metal. Armor. 12 sets, maybe more. Coming from the south, along the only trail April had left open. Distance, 400 meters. Average speed. They'll be here in 10 minutes. Knox turned to the team. Everyone was standing on the porch of the stone house. Hana with her backpack. She slept with her backpack, which held her notebooks every night, just in case. Yuna with a bag, seeds. Layla with a folder of documents she never let out of her hands. Mira in a jacket 3 sizes too big, with a chicken under her arm. The chicken was asleep. Sora in a coat. Calm. Too calm. Knox said one word. "Let's go." April shook her head, slowly, the way people shake their heads when they've made a decision before they've asked. She said there was nowhere to run this time. Mountains. One trail down, they're on it. There's no other way. She pulled Knox aside, quietly. She said she could hold them off on this trail, for a while. The trail is narrow, 2 people at a time. She's a D-rank spearwoman with full mana channels. On a narrow trail, she's worth 1 A-rank, maybe 2. Knox can get away with the team, through the mountains. Mira knows the mountains. Knox looked at her, didn't answer, turned to Mira. He asked if there was another way. Mira thought, nodded, said there was a trail through the pass to the northeast, a goat trail, narrow, rocks, scree, dangerous at night, but it exists. She'd walked it with goats. Goats can get through, so can people. Knox nodded, turned back. He looked at the mana tree, 3 meters tall. Dark blue leaves glowed in the dark, golden. The trunk had a metallic sheen, the crown like an umbrella over the mana point. Roots 12 meters down, connected to an underground structure with an organism, with a pulse of 2 beats per minute. He couldn't dig it up, not in an hour, not in a night, not in a week. The roots had grown in, fused together, become part of something bigger. To tear them away would mean killing the tree. And maybe not just the tree. Maybe the connection worked both ways. Maybe the organism below had grown accustomed to this tree as well. Maybe this was the first real connection between it and the surface, the first contact. Knox faced a choice, the tree or the people. He deliberated for 3 seconds. The tree couldn't be taken. He couldn't leave the people behind. The choice was made. He turned to Hana, told her to take the notebooks, all of them, every single one, not to leave a single page behind. He turned to Yuna, the seeds, every last one, every little bag, every jar, every handful of mycelium she could carry. He turned to Layla, documents, maps, student lists, addresses, anything that could lead Iron Dominion to the network. He turned to Mira. We're not taking the chickens or the goats. Mira opened her mouth. She wanted to object. The chicken under her arm woke up and clucked. Knox shook his head gently. He said the goats would find their own way. They know the mountains better than people. The chickens won't run far, they're tame. They'll wait. They'll come back for them. Mira pressed her lips together. She set the chicken down on the ground. The chicken clucked indignantly and went into the barn. He turned to Sora. Sora stood calmly. Her hands glowed, barely noticeably. Mana rose from her fingertips like steam from hot water. The air around her hands shimmered. Knox knew what that meant. Sora was preparing for battle.
An S-rank archmage was preparing to wipe 12 people off the face of the earth. She could, with a single spell. Nox had seen it once before, when Sora showed Mira what S-rank meant. She raised her hand, snapped her fingers. A boulder the size of a house split in half, effortlessly, without breaking a sweat, like a person breaking a cookie. 12 A and B ranks were no match for her. It was a cleanup. She said she'd hold them off. Her voice was even, matter-of-fact, as if she were offering to wash the dishes. Nox said no. Sora looked at him, for the first time in all the time he'd known her, with irritation, genuine, sharp. She said she was S-rank, that 12 B and A ranks were nothing, that she could stop them alone, that he didn't need to worry about it. That he should think about trees and tomatoes, and she would think about how to protect his trees and tomatoes. Nox replied that he knew, that he had no doubts, that he had seen the boulder. But if Sora Chong, an S-rank archmage, the face of the nation, the face of the Hunters Association, attacks Iron Dominion operatives, by morning the whole world will know about it. Every news agency, every guild, every hunter from F to S. Sora Jong is protecting a fugitive F-rank farmer. She's killing Iron Dominion operatives for the farmer's sake. And then it won't just be Iron Dominion looking for them. The entire Hunters Association, every guild, everyone who finds Sora inconvenient. And there are plenty of those. An S-rank who doesn't obey orders is a threat. An S-rank who kills for a fugitive is a criminal. Sora is a shield, but a shield only works as long as it remains unseen, as long as no one knows she's with them, as long as she can come and go, as long as she remains the face of the association. If she enters the fray, the shield will vanish, and they'll all be left defenseless. Sora was silent. Her hands stopped glowing. The mana dissipated. The air stopped trembling. She understood. She didn't want to, but she understood. Nox could see it on her face, in the way she clenched her jaw, in the way her eyes welled up for a second, just one. Then they dried up. She nodded with a single movement. Nox turned to April. He said he needed 10 minutes. April nodded. 10 minutes. She could give him 10 minutes, even 15. The path was narrow, a single path. She knew where it narrowed to the width of a shoulder. That's where she would stand. She walked into the darkness, alone, with a spear, barefoot, silent, like a shadow that had detached itself from the wall and gone off to fight. Nox ran toward the Manu tree, not to dig it up, he knew he couldn't, to take what he could, the third fruit of the season. Nox had seen it yesterday, small, greenish, unripe, hanging on the lowest branch, the size of a grape. At least 3 weeks until it ripened, but it was there, the only one. Nox plucked it, carefully, with 2 fingers, put it in his shirt pocket, close to his heart. Then he cut 3 cuttings, Yuna's knife, a kitchen knife, sharp. 3 branches with leaves, with buds. New trees could be grown from them, not as strong as the mother tree. Without a connection to the underground organism, but alive, capable of taking root, capable of reaching the depths one day, if planted correctly, in the right soil. Nox wrapped the cuttings in a damp cloth, tied it up, put it in Yuna's bag with the seeds. Then he did something he had never done before. He placed both palms on the tree trunk, pressed his forehead against the bark. He closed his eyes. The bark was warm, almost hot. A pulse ran through it, 2 beats per minute. Nox felt every beat with his forehead, through the bone, through his brain. And he asked, not the system, not a skill, not the universe, the tree. He asked it to survive, to wait, not to die, not to give up. He would return. He didn't know when, but he would return. Because it was his tree. He had planted it, nurtured it, watered it, talked to it every morning. And he would return. The tree didn't answer. Trees don't answer. They don't speak. They don't nod. They don't promise. They just grow, or don't grow. But the bark beneath his palms grew another degree warmer, and a pulse from deep within, 2 beats per minute, became 3. For a second, just 1, then went back to 2. Knox pulled his hands away, stepped back, looked at the tree. Dark blue leaves, a golden glow. 3 meters of life he'd grown from a black seed the size of a pea. He turned. He ran. Sounds of battle from the southern trail, the clang of metal against stone, flashes of white light, mana strikes. 1, another, a third, then silence for 3 seconds, then the clang again. April was fighting, 1 against 12. No, not against 12. The path was narrow. The spot she'd chosen was 1.5 meters wide, a rock face to the left, a cliff to the right. Only 2 could pass at a time. April stood in the passageway. Her spear glinted in the moonlight. Long, fast. She was D rank. They were A and B. But she was standing on a narrow mountain path at night, and she knew this path. They didn't. Every rock, every ledge, every spot where a foot could slip. She knew. They didn't. And her mana channels were fully restored. The first fruit of the mana tree, a gift from Nox. She was using it now. Every drop. The spear sang. A D-rank spearwoman with full mana channels against A and B ranks on a narrow mountain trail at 3 in the morning. She couldn't win, but she could hold them off. And she held them off for a minute. 2, 5, 8. Nox ran past, didn't stop, didn't look. Because if he had looked, he would have stayed. And he couldn't stay. He carried an unripe fruit in his pocket, 3 cuttings in a bag. On his back, Hana, who had tripped on a rock and twisted her ankle. Not on his back, by the hand. He was dragging her. Hana ran limping. Notebooks clattered in her backpack. Yuna ran beside the bag of seeds, Layla behind her. A folder of documents pressed against her chest. Mira was in front. She knew the path, the goat trail across the pass. Narrow, dark, dangerous. But she had walked it with goats. The goats had made it through. People would make it through too. Sora walked last, between the group and the fight. She didn't interfere. Her hands didn't glow. But Nox knew she was listening to every sound, every blow, every cry. And she was counting. How much she could endure before her patience ran out and she turned around and did what she did better than anyone in the world. April held out for 8 minutes. Then she retreated, in an orderly fashion, like a professional, like a soldier who knows the difference between retreat and flight. A step back, a spear thrust. A step back, a block. A step back, a lunge, a retreat. Every movement precise. Not a single unnecessary one. Not a single panic-stricken one. She brought the trail crashing down behind her. A precise, mana-enhanced spear strike into the stone ledge above the trail. Rocks rained down. A ton. 2. Blocking the passage. Not forever. For a minute. Maybe 2. Maybe 3. Enough to gain some distance. She caught up with the group on the goat trail 4 minutes later. She'd been running, barefoot over the rocks, blood on her left shoulder, a wound. Nox looked. He stopped. April said it was just a scratch. Her voice was steady. Her breathing was almost unbroken. Nox said nothing. He pulled a basil leaf from his pocket, mountain basil, from a mana point. He crushed it between his fingers. The scent was sharp, herbal, with a hint of something metallic. He pressed it to the wound. April hissed. She flinched. Then she relaxed. Mountain basil, pain-relieving and healing. The bleeding stopped after 30 seconds. They walked across the pass until dawn. Mira led the way. A goat trail, narrow, dark. The rocks beneath their feet were slippery with dew. 1 false step and a cliff, 200 meters down. Hana was limping. Nox led her by the hand. Yuna carried a bag of seeds and said nothing. For the first time in all the time Nox had known her, Yuna was silent. Layla counted her steps, a habit she always counted. Sora walked in silence and looked back. Nox carried an unripe manadera fruit in his shirt pocket, small, greenish, warm from his body, and 3 cuttings in Yuna's bag, wrapped in damp cloth. All that remained of 2 years of work, of the mycelium network, of the 3 greenhouses, of the mountain farm, of the goats and chickens, of the manna tree. Everything, in his pocket and her bag. That was enough. For a botanist, a single seed is always enough. Cain Veller entered the mountain farm at dawn. They cleared the rockfall in 40 minutes. An A-rank swordsman chopped up the large boulders. The path was clear. They climbed up. The farm was empty, quiet. The greenhouses were intact, not a single broken pane of glass. The garden beds were untouched, red tomatoes on the vines, basil in bloom. Mint had grown to the size of a bush. Everything was well tended, alive. Goats roamed the yard. One approached Cain and nudged his hand with its muzzle. Chickens clucked in the barn.
In the stone house, there were cups on the table, 7 of them, half-drunk tea, still warm. And a tree. Cain saw it when he walked around the greenhouse, 3 meters tall, dark blue leaves, metallic bark, glowing in the morning mist, golden, as if a fire were burning inside the trunk. Cain stood in front of the tree. He looked. 10 years in the Iron Dominion, hundreds of operations, dozens of dungeons. He had seen A-rank artifacts. He had seen weapons that sliced through reality. He had seen monsters capable of wiping out a city. But he had never seen anything like this. The tree was beautiful, not as an object, as a phenomenon, like dawn, like the stars, a beauty that cannot be appropriated. He activated his system appraisal skill, an A-rank paladin. His skill displayed the combat value of targets, people, monsters, objects. The system displayed a single word: priceless. Not invaluable, priceless. The difference is subtle. Invaluable is when the value exceeds any price. Inestimable is when the system cannot determine what is before it, cannot classify it, cannot fit it into a framework, something beyond its categories. Cain saw this word for the second time in his life. The first time was at the S-rank rift, at the portal itself, on the border between worlds. Inestimable. Cain was silent. Then he stepped closer. He reached out his hand. He touched the bark. Warm, much warmer than the air, pulsing, alive. He felt the rhythm beneath his fingers, 2 beats per minute, steady, calm, as if the tree were sleeping or waiting. He took out his communicator. He reported. The target had gone, presumably over the pass to the northeast. Pursuit is impossible without mountaineering gear. Tree detected, awaiting instructions. Headquarters replied an hour later. 1 instruction. Cut it down. Bring back the roots and trunk for analysis. Cain looked at the tree. He looked at the instruction on the communicator screen. Cut it down. He looked at the tree again. The leaves were glowing, even in the daytime, even in the morning sun. Golden, as if the tree were making its own sun. He put the communicator in his pocket, stood there for another minute, then turned to the chain. 6 faces, waiting for orders. Professionals. They don't care. Tree, rock, man, whatever they're told, they'll do. Cain said the tree was too big to transport. The roots go down to an unknown depth. Attempting to cut it down could damage the root system, which would devalue the specimen. Special equipment is needed, a team of botanists. If there are any botanists left in the Iron Dominion, that he'll request everything necessary and return. The chain of command accepted it. No questions asked. An order is an order, even if the order is to wait. They went down. Cain was the last to leave. He turned around at the farm gate. He looked at the tree. It stood in the morning light, dark blue and gold, alive. The leaves were moving, not from the wind. There was no wind. They were moving on their own, slowly,
as if they were breathing. He didn't cut it down. Not because he felt sorry for it. Kane Veller didn't feel sorry for trees. He hadn't felt sorry for anything in 10 years. But he didn't cut it down because, for the first time in 10 years, he wasn't sure he was following the right order. And because somewhere deep down in his professional soul, the former paladin remembered that paladins used to protect, not cut down. They stood on the other side of the pass, 7 of them. Dawn, mountain air, cold, with a hint of dew and stone. The sky was pink in the east. Below them lay a valley that wasn't on any map, small, enclosed by mountains on 3 sides, open to the north. A river, narrow, fast-flowing, with clear water in which the stones on the bottom are visible. A meadow, green, bright, brighter than it should be in early autumn. Trees, ordinary earthly trees, birches, fir trees, oaks, standing along the river like sentinels, and among them, something else. Nox saw it first, because he always saw first. Not because he had better eyes, because he looked at what others didn't look at. 3 sprouts, dark, almost black, with golden veins on their stems, knee-high. The leaves are small, dark blue, a familiar shape, a familiar hue. Man trees, wild, sprouted on their own, without a human, without a mycelium, without a pot, without Nox, just grown out of the ground, because the earth decided it was time. Nox sat down, right on a rock. His legs gave out. Not from fatigue, though he'd been walking all night across the pass. Not from fear, though a burning farm and 12 armed men lay behind him. His legs gave out from the realization, from the magnitude of what he saw. 3 sprouts, wild. In a valley that isn't on the map. It meant one thing. The organism down below wasn't waiting for Nox. It didn't depend on him. It didn't need a farmer to plant and water it. It grew on its own, by its own laws, on its own schedule. Nox wasn't a gardener. Nox was a translator, the only one who could read what the organism was writing on the surface. But the organism wrote even without a translator. Mira stood beside him. She looked down. She looked at Nox. She asked if he saw what she saw. Nox nodded. Mira was silent for a moment. Then she said quietly that they were her goats. They always lay down in certain spots, on mana points. They sensed it. For 3 years. Mira had thought the goats were just capricious, choosing warm spots. Now she understood. The goats were listening, just like Nox listens, just in a different way. Nox looked at her, nodded, said she was right. That goats are beasts and animals sense the earth better than humans. That her Beastmaster F wasn't a trash class, it was a class that hears animals, and animals hear the earth. A chain of perception. Mira said nothing, but she straightened up, just a little, by a centimeter. It was beginning. The relict Flora was waking up. Not in a year, nor in 2 as Nox had assumed. Now, here, already. 3 sprouts in a valley that isn't on the map. And Nox knew there were dozens of such valleys across the planet. Hundreds, thousands, everywhere the faults had penetrated the soil, everywhere the subterranean organism had stretched its roots, everywhere the earth had accumulated enough mana, everywhere the soil temperature had risen by those very 2 or 3 degrees that distinguish living earth from sleeping earth. Sprouts were breaking through right now, in parks, in vacant lots, on the sides of roads, between the slabs of abandoned parking lots, through cracks in the concrete, like grass, like life, unstoppable. They descended into the valley around noon. Hannah was limping, her leg was swollen. Nox carried her backpack with the notebooks, heavy, 12 notebooks, 2 years of notes, knowledge that was priceless. April brought up the rear. The wound on her shoulder had closed. Basil had worked his magic, but she was on guard, listening to the mountains, listening to the wind, listening to the stones beneath her feet. Sora walked beside Hannah, silently,
sometimes offering her shoulder when Hannah stumbled. S-rank Archmage, a living crutch. She didn't complain. Nox knelt before the first sprout. He activated soil identification. He closed his eyes. He opened them. The sprout was healthy, young, perhaps 2 or 3 months since sprouting. The stem was sturdy, the leaves were clean, no damage, no disease. Its roots extended 3 meters down and were already touching the underground structure. The connection was pure, natural, without human assistance. No intermediary mycelium, no special soil mix, just a root touching a root, and they connected, like 2 wires, closed the circuit. Nox sat in front of the sprout and thought for a long time. Hannah approached, opened her notebook, waited. Nox wasn't dictating, he was thinking. Then he said one sentence. He said he didn't need to grow mana trees. Hannah looked up. Nox continued. He said they would grow on their own, everywhere, all over the planet. The organism is waking up. Not because Nox woke it up, on its own schedule, according to the biological clock of a creature the size of a continent. 6 years of sleep, a period of adaptation. Now the adaptation is complete. The roots have taken hold, the soil has been accepted, and the organism begins the next phase, germination. Nox is not a gardener. The mana trees are not his tomatoes. He cannot control the process. He cannot speed it up or slow it down. He cannot decide where they should grow and where they shouldn't. That is not his decision. This decision belongs to a being greater than any guild, greater than any country, greater than anything humans have built in their history. But Nox can do something else. He can teach the world to live with them. He can explain, show, translate from the language of the roots into the language of humans. He doesn't need to grow mana trees. He needs to grow understanding. Hannah was taking notes, quickly, in detail. The 9th notebook, a new one, a blank one. She began filling out the first page. The valley's coordinates, approximate, without GPS, by the stars and mountain landmarks. Mira helped. She knew the mountains, the size of the sprouts, height, stem thickness, number of leaves, color, root depth based on Nox's skill data, soil composition, mana background, pH, moisture, temperature, mineral composition. Everything. Every detail Nox could measure. And those he couldn't. Hannah added her own. She sensed the mycelium from the mana tree's fruit. Here in the valley, the mycelium was different, wild, not planted by Nox. It had grown on its own. It was thinner than Nox's mycelium, more delicate, but more extensive. It covered the entire valley, every square meter. Hannah felt it as a quiet hum beneath her feet, constant, steady, alive. She took notes. Nox dictated until evening, because in the year, this data wouldn't be needed by him. It would be needed by those 8 people in 12 cities who had already received his seeds, and by those whom those 8 would teach, and by those whom they would teach. A chain of knowledge that never breaks, that cannot be cut down, cannot be burned, cannot be planted in a field with a collar, because it is in minds, in hands, in the fingers that touch the earth. Layla found an abandoned house on the edge of the valley, stone, old, maybe 100 years old, maybe 200. Walls a meter thick, built of mountain stone without mortar, fitted so tightly that a knife blade couldn't slip between the stones. The roof is intact. The wooden beams had darkened with age but hadn't rotted. Inside, it was dry, dusty, empty. 2 rooms, a kitchen with a stone stove, an attic. The windows were small, like loopholes. The house was built by someone who didn't want to be found, or someone who didn't want to be bothered. Yuna checked the kitchen first. She opened the stove, peered inside, pulled out an old bird's nest, brushed her hands off. Said the stove was in working order, the chimney was clean, they could cook. She turned to Nox, asked if they had any food. Nox looked at Yuna. He looked at the bag of seeds. He said they had seeds. Yuna looked at the seeds.
She looked at Nox. She said seeds weren't dinner. Nox replied that seeds were breakfast in 3 weeks, and they needed to find dinner today. Mira went into the forest 10 minutes later. She returned 2 hours later, with mushrooms, with wild burdock roots, with a bunch of wild garlic, with a handful of rosehip berries. Not mountain rosehips, the ordinary kind, red ones. Nox looked at what she had brought. He checked it using his skill. Everything was clean, no mana mutations, ordinary earthly food. Yuna cooked it, out of nothing. From the mushrooms, burdock, wild garlic, and rosehips, she made soup, hot.
Thick, with a scent that filled the stone house from floor to ceiling. Nox tasted it. He closed his eyes. Yuna asked if it was tasty. Nox replied that it was. Yuna nodded. She went to wash the pot. Nox planted 3 mana tree cuttings that same day, before dinner. While Yuna was cooking, he went out to the river. He found a spot, a mana point. Hannah sensed it. She pointed it out. Right here. Nox dug with his hands. No shovel. The shovel was left at the mountain farm. With his hands, fingers in the ground, deeper, deeper. 3 holes, 30 centimeters each. He unfolded the damp cloth. 3 cuttings. Alive. The leaves were slightly wilted, but not dead. The buds were intact. The bark was intact. He planted them, each in its own hole. He packed the soil around them. He watered them with river water. Cold, clear. The cuttings were weak after the journey, after a night on the pass, after the cold and the jostling. But the soil was strong. The mana point warmed the soil from below. Wild, thin, delicate mycelium was already reaching out toward the new roots, welcoming them, like a hostess welcomes guests. And Nox knew what to do. He always knew what to do with the earth. It was the only thing he knew, and it turned out to be enough. By evening on their first day in the valley, they were sitting at the table again, a stone table in a stone house, so heavy that 10 people couldn't have moved it. Yuna had cooked using their last supplies and what Mira had found. Soup, rice from the sack that Hannah had grabbed at the last moment before fleeing. Tea made from dried herbs. Hannah brewed it. Her hands were still trembling. Her leg hurt. But she brewed the tea with the same precision with which she kept her notebooks. Every movement precise, every proportion measured. Nox sat in silence. He looked at the team, at their faces, tired, dirty, gaunt after a sleepless night. April ate quickly. The wound on her shoulder had closed, but she moved her left arm cautiously. Sora ate slowly, her coat on the back of a chair, dirt stains on her knees. Mira fed Yuna because Yuna fed everyone else and forgot about herself. Layla wasn't eating. She was counting. Losses, assets, what remained, what was lost, what could be recovered. Nox saw her lips moving, silently. Numbers. Always numbers. Nox waited until everyone had finished eating. Then he spoke, quietly, calmly. Without drama, without strain. With the voice of a man who had made a decision and was stating it as a fact. He said he was tired of hiding. Everyone looked at him at the same time, 6 pairs of eyes. He had never said that before. In 2 years, not once. Nox Hale, quiet, cautious. A man who kneels in the dirt and remains silent. Who hides not out of cowardice, but out of calculation. Who knows that a living farmer is more useful than a dead hero. And this man said he was tired of hiding. He continued. He said that for 2 years he had been running from the Iron Dominion, from the Association, from the world, from Greystone to the mountains, from the mountains over the pass, from one greenhouse to another, from one house to another, hiding himself, hiding his knowledge, hiding seeds, hiding in the shadows like mycelium hides underground. And all this time, he was afraid, not of death. Death is simple, quick, no pain. Pain passes. He was afraid that if they found him, they would take everything, put him back in the field, with a collar, with the number 2247 on his robe. And what he knows
will die with him in that field, slowly, in silence. No one will know. No one will learn. Knowledge will rot like a root without water. But now he understands, he sees. 3 wild man trees in a nameless valley. Knowledge that dies with a single person is worth nothing. A seed that isn't planted is just a pebble. A recipe that isn't passed on is just a thought. A notebook that no one will read is just paper. He is a botanist, not a keeper of secrets. The earth does not belong to those who hide. The earth belongs to those who plant. He looked at each of them, slowly, one by one. At Hannah, with the notebooks she'd carried over the pass on a sprained foot and hadn't dropped a single one. At April, with a spear and a wounded shoulder, who stood on the narrow path against 12 and gave him 10 minutes. At Sora, with tired eyes and mana radiation spoiling the soil's pH within a 5-meter radius, who took off her coat and knelt in the mud because he asked her to. To Mira, with freckles and Nobel-winning chickens, who spent 3 years alone in the mountains reading what laboratories could not. To Layla, with glasses and insomnia, who turns away only from his tea, who signed a contract for 23 lives and now counts her new lives every day. To Yuna, with a frying pan and tears for her grandfather, who cooks the shadows and the living alike. With love, with memory, with Basil picked before 10 in the morning. He said he wouldn't hide anymore, he wouldn't run, he wouldn't build one greenhouse and wait for it to be burned down, and build another, and wait for that one to be burned down too. He would build a network, not one farm, 10, D20, 100, across the country, across the world, in every place where relict flora begins to sprout. And it will begin, everywhere, soon. And in each of these places, there will be a person, someone he has trained, someone who knows what to do when a dark sprout with golden veins emerges from the ground, someone who won't be afraid, someone who won't pull it out, someone who won't call the guild to have it cut down, someone who will crouch down, touch the earth, sniff it, and begin to observe. Iron Dominion wants to monopolize the new flora, use it as a resource, control it, sell it. The association wants the same thing, only with a different logo on the paperwork. Nox wants it to live, just to live, to grow, to bloom, to bear fruit, just as everything he planted lived. Tomatoes that feed, basil that heals, mint that eases pain, mana trees that connect worlds, people who learn to listen to the earth. He always planted the same way, found the right soil, provided the right conditions, and waited, patiently, through seasons, through years, because patience is the only weapon a farmer has, and it is stronger than any sword. Because a sword cuts once, but a seed grows forever. Hannah raised her hand. She said she had a question. Knox nodded. Hannah asked where they would start, simply, practically, tomorrow morning. Where? Knox replied, just as simple, just as practical, in the morning. In the morning he'll get up, he'll step outside, he'll walk over to the sprout, he'll get down on his knees, he'll check the soil, he'll dig his fingers into the earth, he'll take a sniff, he'll think, he'll smile because the earth always smells right, and he'll start planting, because that's what he knows how to do, the only thing he knows how to do. He's not a mage, not a warrior, not an archmage, not a paladin, not a leader, not a hero. He's a farmer. F rank, number 2247. A man who plants. And that turned out to be enough. 2 weeks later, the first reports came in from 8 students via Layla's network. The mycelium took root in 4 out of 8 cities: Baltimore, Portland, Savannah, Richmond. 2 students saw a glow, blue, underground, with the naked eye, without any special ability. They wrote that it was like seeing the veins of the earth, scary and beautiful at the same time. One farmer from Savannah saw a wild man tree sprout in the vacant lot behind his house, between the trash cans and an old fence, a dark stem, golden veins. He wrote that he was scared. He wanted to pull it out. Then he remembered. He reread Nox's note. Don't be afraid. It's normal. Look, smell it, touch the earth. He stopped being afraid. He sat down next to the sprout. He put his hand on the ground. He felt the warmth. He began to watch. He wrote to Nox that the sprout had grown 10 centimeters in a week, that the ground around it was warmer, that the grass nearby had turned greener, that the stray cat that used to live behind the trash cans now sleeps by the sprout, every night, curled up around the stem. A month later, the students got in touch with each other. Layla set up an anonymous connection. Encrypted messages through a chain of intermediaries. No names, no addresses, only call signs. Farmer 1, Herbalist 3, Gatherer 7. They exchanged data, observations, recipes, questions, answers. One F-rank farmer from a southern city wrote that he had grown a tomato with 3% mana, without Nox's instructions, all on his own, through trial and error. Nox read his report, smiled, wrote a reply. He said that 3% was excellent, but if harvested before 10 in the morning, it would be 3.5. Another E-rank herbalist found a way to double the pain-relieving effect of mint through a new mycelium, which he hadn't planted, which came on its own, from beneath a wild sprout of a mana tree that had sprouted at an abandoned construction site across the street from his house. The mycelium crawled to his garden bed in 2 weeks. It entwined itself around the mint roots, and the mint changed. A third F-rank female gatherer from Richmond discovered that the roots of the wild mana tree purify contaminated soil within a 10-meter radius. The soil near the abandoned factory had been poisoned with heavy metals for 30 years. Nothing grew there. The mana tree sprouted through the concrete. A year later, the soil around it was clean, cleaner than in a downtown park. The woman planted carrots in that soil. The carrots grew. Ordinary ones. Orange. No mana effects. Just carrots. On land where nothing had grown for 30 years. She wrote Nox a single sentence. She wrote that it was a miracle. Nox wrote back that it wasn't a miracle. It was botany. The data came in every week. Hannah recorded it. The notebooks filled up. The 10th, the 11th, 12th. Nox read every report, every word. He commented, he corrected them, he praised them, he sent them back with notes, with advice, with new seeds when he could. The network grew, like a mycelium, quietly, underground, invisible to those looking up. In 2 months, 8 became 15. The students taught others, not because Nox asked them to, because when you see mycelium glowing underground, you can't stay silent. You grab your neighbor's hand and say, "Look." The seeds spread. The mycelium crept across the country, quietly, invisibly, unstoppably, like everything Nox does, like everything the earth does. Iron Dominion noticed. Too late. Reports of wild mana tree sprouts began pouring in from 10 regions simultaneously. Analysts didn't understand what was happening. They thought it was an attack, a biological weapon, sabotage. They called an emergency meeting. Kane Weller sat in the corner, silent, drinking coffee. He listened as the leadership discussed a plan to destroy the sprouts with herbicides and fire. The Hunters Association noticed it too, also too late. They were hunting monsters, sealing off dungeons. They were catching criminals. And beneath their feet, something was growing that was more important than all the monsters and dungeons combined. Relic flora had sprouted at 23 locations across the country in a single season. Wild sprouts of mana trees were pushing through the asphalt of parking lots, through the concrete of abandoned factories, through the tiles of city squares, through the foundations of houses, everywhere, unstoppable. The world was changing, the earth was changing, and the warrior classes, with their swords and magic, watched this and didn't know what to do. Because you can't cut it down with a sword, you can't burn it with magic. You cut down one sprout, 3 will sprout nearby.
you burn 3. 10 will sprout. This isn't a monster you can kill. It's not a dungeon you can seal off. It grows. It just grows. Like all living things grow. Because life is what it does. It grows. And the only people who understood what to do about it were those the world had written off. The trash classes. Farmers, F. Herbalists, E. Gatherers, F. Animal breeders, F. Cooks, C. Bookkeepers, B. Those the guilds wouldn't accept. Those who weren't issued insurance. Those who were told they wouldn't live to see their payout. Those who knelt in the dirt while heroes swung swords above. Those who listened. Quietly, patiently, through the seasons. Now the world needed them, for the first time in 6 years, for the first time in the history of the system. And they were ready, not because anyone had prepared them, because of one person, one F-rank farmer with a master's degree in botany. Number 2247, he sent them seeds and a note. Plant. Observe. Record. Don't be afraid. It's normal. Knox Hale, F-rank, farmer. He knelt in a nameless valley. The earth beneath his fingers was warm, moist, alive. The mycelium pulsed, 4 beats per minute. No, 5. The rhythm was picking up. The organism was waking up, slowly. Like everything vast wakes up. Like a glacier begins to move, like a continent begins to drift, slowly, unstoppably. Next to him, Hannah was taking notes, a pencil on paper, the 13th notebook. Behind her, April stood with a spear, gazing at the mountains. She stood in the doorway, as she always did, arms crossed, the gaze of a predator, but directed outward, guarding. Yuna was cooking in the kitchen of the stone house. The smell of soup made from mushrooms and wild garlic, and something new. She had found wild thyme by the river. Mira was feeding the goats that had come over the pass on their own after all. 4 goats, silvery fur, intelligent eyes. They found a mana point by the river and lay down around the saplings of the mana tree, like a guard, like a family. Layla was counting. She sat in the stone house at a stone table with papers, a map on the wall. Red buttons, 15 points. Soon there would be 20, then 30, then 100. She counted, and for the first time in a long while, the numbers added up toward life rather than death. Sora arrived at dawn, without warning, as always. In the coat she never took off. She stood silently next to Nox, not in the garden, next to him, at a safe distance for pH. 5 meters. She remembered. Nox raised his head, looked at her. She looked at him. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She just stood there, like a tree stands next to another tree, silently, with roots in the same soil. Nox scooped up a handful of soil, rubbed it between his fingers, slowly, with a familiar motion, a motion he'd made thousands of times, brought it to his nose, sniffed. Iron, humus, mana. And something else, something new. Something wasn't there 2 years ago when he first stood barefoot on the Iron Dominion field. Something that wasn't in Greystone, that wasn't on Mira's mountain farm. A new scent. Warm, deep, like the smell of bread fresh from the oven, like the smell of a home he'd never had. The earth taught him, just as he taught others. Exchange, symbiosis, mycelium between 2 roots. He smiled, quietly, just the corners of his lips. He lowered his hand, unclenched his fingers. The earth trickled back through his fingers, back to the earth, where it came from, where everything returns. He began to plant. Somewhere deep beneath the nameless valley, beneath the mountains, beneath the rivers, beneath the cities and roads and parking lots and foundations. His pulse grew slightly steadier, 3 beats per minute, then 4, then 5. His body was waking up.
He had slept for 6 years. He had adapted for 6 years. He had waited for 6 years. And for the first time in those 6 years, he felt that there was someone up there who was listening to him. Not afraid, not chopping, not burning. Listening. Hands in the earth, fingers on the roots, ear to the soil. A single quiet man, on his knees, with a shovel. The earth remembers who loved it.